Get out of my building." Charlotte Whitmore slammed the termination letter on the desk so hard the coffee cup rattled. She didn't ask questions. She didn't wait for an explanation. She just pointed at the door, at the man sitting across from her in a grease-stained maintenance uniform, still smelling like engine oil and a sleepless night, and said it again, slower, the way people say things when they want the words to leave a mark. "You're fired today. Now get out." Marcus Carter didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He folded his hands in his lap, looked at the woman who had just thrown him out of the company he built, and said nothing. Because what was there to say? She didn't know. She had no idea that the engine her entire championship depended on, the engine her best engineers couldn't save, had just been brought back from the dead by the man she was firing. And she had absolutely no idea that he was the one who designed it in the first place. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see every corner of America this story reaches. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. Because what happens next will change the way you see every quiet man you've ever walked past without a second look. The engine was dying. You could hear it from 50 feet away, a deep, rattling groan coming up through the concrete floor of Titan Apex Motors' primary racing facility, vibrating through the walls of the locker rooms, through the storage corridors, through the bones of every worker still on site past midnight. It was the sound of something mechanical giving out, the way an old man's heart gives out, not all at once, but in stages, each one worse than the last. Marcus Carter heard it from the janitor's closet on sub-level 2. He was wringing out a mop. He stopped. He tilted his head slightly to the left, the way a doctor might tilt his head when he hears something in a patient's chest that shouldn't be there. His eyes didn't move. His jaw went tight. He stood completely still for 3 full seconds, just listening, the way a man listens when he already knows the answer, but needs his body to confirm it. Then he set the mop against the wall quietly, carefully, and walked toward the sound. Marcus Carter was 35 years old and had been working at Titan Apex Motors for 11 months. His official title was Facility Maintenance Technician 2, which was the company's formal way of saying he cleaned things, fixed things that broke, and stayed out of the way of people who mattered. He came in before the sun came up. He left after most of the night crew had gone home. He wore the same dark gray uniform every day, the one with the small embroidered patch on the chest that said maintenance in yellow thread. He kept his head down. He didn't eat lunch in the main cafeteria with the engineers. He ate alone, usually in the stairwell of Building C, with a thermos of black coffee and a ham sandwich his daughter had helped him pack the night before. To every executive, every senior engineer, every marketing associate who passed him in the hallway with a quick glance and an even quicker look away, Marcus Carter was invisible. That was in many ways exactly what he wanted. He had been a different man once. Not a different person, the same quiet intensity had always been there, the same careful way of observing the world before speaking about it. But he had been a different version of himself, younger, louder in his own way, full of a fire that he hadn't yet learned to bank. 10 years ago, Marcus Carter had walked through the front doors of Titan Apex Motors as a 25-year-old engineer with a mechanical engineering degree, a head full of ideas that the industry had never seen, and a burning need to prove something that he couldn't quite name yet but felt in every cell of his body. He had been recruited directly out of graduate school by a man named Gerald Haynes, the company's chief technical officer at the time, a big, loud man from Alabama who had a gift for spotting raw genius and absolutely no patience for bureaucracy. Gerald had seen Marcus's graduate thesis, a paper on adaptive combustion dynamics in high-performance rotary engines, and had called him personally. Not had an assistant call. Gerald himself, sitting in his office with the thesis open on his desk, had dialed the number. "Son," Gerald had said, without preamble, "I don't know what they're paying you to finish that degree, but whatever it is, I'll beat it. Come talk to me." Marcus had gone. He had talked. 3 weeks later, he was in Indianapolis, sitting in the design lab at Titan Apex, surrounded by people who mostly looked at him like he was in the wrong room. He stayed anyway. The first year had been brutal. Not because of the work. Marcus loved the work with a ferocity that sometimes scared him. He would stay in the lab until 2 and 3 in the morning, not because anyone asked him to, but because he was in the middle of solving something, and stopping felt physically painful. He dreamed about engine dynamics. He woke up in the middle of the night with solutions to problems he'd been carrying for weeks, and he'd write them down in the dark on whatever paper was nearby. The work was the easy part. The people were harder. There were comments early on that Marcus filed away in a drawer in the back of his mind and tried to keep locked. Comments about how he'd come a long way. Questions at every meeting about whether he was sure about his calculations asked with a slightly tilted head and a carefully neutral voice that said everything it was trying not to say. The way certain senior engineers would take his ideas, rework them slightly, and present them in meetings as their own, with the quiet confidence of men who had never been questioned in their lives. Marcus watched all of it. He cataloged it, and he kept working. Because the work didn't lie. The equations didn't care what he looked like. The engine didn't care where he came from. When he was alone in that lab, with nothing but the hum of the ventilation system and a problem that needed solving, everything else fell away. He was just a mind and a set of hands and a question that needed an answer. And God, he was good at finding the answers. By his second year at Titan Apex, Marcus had designed the initial framework for what would become the TRX-7 engine system, a revolutionary approach to fuel injection timing and combustion chamber geometry that nobody in the industry had tried before because everyone assumed it was too complex to be practical. Marcus didn't assume anything. He ran the calculations. He built the models. He worked through 47 different iterations over the course of 8 months, throwing out everything that didn't hold, refining everything that did, until what he had left was something so elegant and so devastatingly efficient that even the people who didn't want to be impressed couldn't help themselves. Gerald Haynes had stood in front of that engine prototype on a cold Tuesday morning in November, watched it run for 10 minutes, and then quietly taken off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Marcus, he'd said, "Yeah, you know what this means." "I think so. This changes everything." Gerald had put his glasses back on and looked at him with something that was very close to awe. "Where the hell did this come from?" Marcus had shrugged. Kept asking the engine what it wanted instead of telling it. Gerald had laughed a big, full laugh that bounced off the concrete walls of the testing bay. Then he'd put his hand on Marcus's shoulder and said, "Son, you are going to be famous." He was wrong about that, but he hadn't known it yet. Marcus had met Diana in his third year at Titan Apex. She was a structural materials researcher at a firm in Indianapolis, and they had met at a conference, the kind of conference where Marcus was usually the only person in the room who looked like him. Diana had walked up to him during the cocktail hour, introduced herself without any of the awkward hesitation people usually brought to that interaction, and said, "I read your paper on adaptive combustion. The thing you said about the relationship between cylinder wall texture and heat dissipation, I've been thinking about that for 3 weeks." They had talked for 4 hours. They'd missed dinner. They hadn't noticed. 2 years later, they were married. A year after that, Lily arrived 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. Marcus had held his daughter in the delivery room and felt something shift inside him that he didn't have language for yet. Something about what mattered. Something about what he was building and who he was building it for. He had been the happiest he'd ever been, and then everything broke. Diana died on a Wednesday, an aneurysm. No warning, no slow decline, no chance to prepare. She had been standing in the kitchen, talking to Marcus about what kind of birthday cake Lily wanted. Lily was 3, and she had recently decided that purple was the only color that mattered, and then she was on the floor, and Marcus was calling 911 with hands that he could not make stop shaking. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. Marcus had sat in the emergency room for 2 hours waiting for news he already knew, with Lily asleep in his lap, and he had felt something happen to the inside of him that he couldn't fully describe, even years later. It was like a load-bearing wall collapsing. Everything the structure had been depending on, suddenly gone. He had gone back to work 3 weeks later, because the insurance and the mortgage and Lily's daycare didn't care that he was drowning. He had lasted 4 more months. Then he had gone into Gerald Haynes' office, closed the door, and said, "I need to leave." Gerald had looked at him for a long time. "Marcus, I'm not asking for a leave of absence. I'm not asking for time off. I need to leave. My daughter needs a father who's present. I can't be that and be here at the same time, not right now. Maybe not ever." Gerald had been quiet. "Then, what about everything you've built here?" "It'll still be built," Marcus had said. "That doesn't need me to stay." He had cleared out his office, shipped his files to a storage unit, and driven home to his daughter. He had never called the company again. The company, it turned out, had never really needed him to. The TRX-7 engine system had gone on to power Titan Apex to 3 consecutive championships. The engineering team had refined it, iterated on it, and in the annual reports, and the press releases and the championship celebrations, the origin story had been simplified, smoothed out, credit distributed among the department as a team achievement. Marcus Carter's name had appeared in the footnotes of one internal document and nowhere else. By the time Marcus walked back into Titan Apex Motors 11 months ago, as a maintenance worker, most of the people who might have recognized him were gone. Gerald Haynes had retired. The engineering department had turned over twice. Charlotte Whitmore had come in as CEO 3 years ago from a luxury automotive brand in Stuttgart, and she had brought her own team, her own culture, her own definition of what Titan Apex was and who had built it. Marcus had applied for the maintenance job using a one-page resume that listed his last employer as a small machine shop in Columbus, Ohio, which was true. He had left out, completely and deliberately, everything that had come before. He wasn't hiding from shame, he was hiding from noise. Lily was 13 now. She needed a father who came home at the same time every night, who helped with algebra homework and packed lunches, and drove her to soccer practice on Saturdays. She needed stability, routine, predictability. The chaos of the engineering world, the late nights, the travel, the constant pressure had already cost their family everything once. Marcus was not going to let it cost them again. The maintenance job paid enough. The hours were manageable. The work was simple, and there was dignity in simple work. Marcus had never believed otherwise. And if, sometimes, while he was cleaning the floor of the primary engineering bay, he found himself glancing at the current engine configuration on the workbench and seeing, instantly and clearly, a half-dozen things that could be improved well, he would look away. He would keep mopping. He did not look away that night. He followed the sound of the dying engine through the basement corridor of Building A, up the service stairwell, and into the back hallway that ran behind the primary racing bay. The racing bay was locked, sealed after hours by a keycard system, but the service access door the one maintenance workers used to bring in equipment had a different lock. Marcus had a key. He stood at the service door for a moment with his hand on the latch. Through the wall, he could hear voices. He hadn't expected that. It was almost 1 a.m., and he'd assumed the engineering team had cleared out. He waited, listening. I don't understand it. That was Dr. Paul Renner, the head of powertrain engineering. Marcus had been listening to the man's voice for 11 months, without ever having been introduced to him. We've run every diagnostic. The output is declining, and we can't isolate the cause. It's the timing. A second voice, younger female, one of the junior engineers Marcus had seen in the bay during the day. The combustion timing is drifting, but every time we correct for it, it drifts back. That's impossible. The feedback loop doesn't allow. I know the feedback loop doesn't allow it. I'm telling you what's happening. A pause. Sounds of frantic keyboard typing. The championship is in 4 days, Renner said. His voice had gone flat, in the way voices go flat, when a person is trying to prevent themselves from panicking. 4 days. If we cannot present a functional engine to the race committee by Thursday, we are disqualified. The entire season is gone. Everything is gone. Another voice. Marcus didn't recognize this one. Should we call Stuttgart? Maybe Hartman's team has seen something like. Hartman's team builds streetcars. Renner's voice sharpened. This is a racing engine. The failure mode is specific to high RPM combustion dynamics. I am not going to call Stuttgart. Silence. Then what do we do? The junior engineer asked. Nobody answered. Marcus leaned his forehead against the service door. The failure mode Renner had described drifting combustion timing that self-corrects against the feedback loop. Marcus knew exactly what that was. He knew it because he had seen it once before, in the very early prototype runs of the TRX-7, before he'd identified and solved it. The fix wasn't in the software. It wasn't in the feedback calibration. It was in the physical geometry of the injector manifold, a tiny dimensional variance that became significant only at very high sustained RPM, creating a microscopic lag in fuel delivery that compounded with each cycle until the timing drift became measurable. The engineering team had apparently never encountered it because it hadn't occurred in the original production models. Something about the current engine, build a newer component, slightly different tolerances, must have reintroduced the variance. Marcus could fix it in his sleep. He stood at the service door and had a conversation with himself that lasted approximately 45 seconds. Walk away, said the part of him that had learned, the hard way, to protect his peace. You know what happens when you step into something like this. You know what it costs. He thought about Lily, asleep in their apartment. He thought about her soccer cleats that needed to be replaced before next season, and the school trip coming up in October, and the look on her face when he was home for dinner versus the look on her face when he wasn't. Walk away. Then he thought about the car, the machine, the engine that someone had built that he had built, the foundational architecture of it, humming and failing on the other side of that wall. He thought about what it meant for every mechanic and technician and support crew member whose livelihood depended on this company winning races. People like him, people who would never be in the room where the decisions were made, but who would feel the consequences of those decisions just as surely. He pushed open the service door and walked in. The engineering team looked up from their workstations like he'd walked in off the moon. Dr. Renner, a trim man in his 50s with silver hair and the permanent expression of someone smelling something slightly unpleasant, straightened up from the bench and said, "Excuse me. This area is restricted access, I know," Marcus said. "I've got the maintenance key. That key is for equipment servicing, not for stopped." Looked at Marcus's uniform, at the yellow maintenance patch, at the mop bucket Marcus had, without thinking about it, brought through the door with him. "Not for this. The engine's timing is drifting," Marcus said. He wasn't sure exactly what made him say it. He'd planned, in the 45 seconds he'd spent at the door, to just come in and offer to look at it. To be vague, to see if he could work without attracting attention. But the words came out before his caution could catch them. The fuel delivery is lagging. It's not the software. It's physical. Dead silence. The junior engineer, late 20s, natural hair pulled back, the kind of dark circles under her eyes that come from not sleeping, turned and stared at him. Renner stared at him. "I'm sorry," Renner said very quietly. "The injector manifold," Marcus said. "There's a dimensional variance in the current build that wasn't in the original spec. At sustained high RPM, the lag compounds. The timing feedback loop keeps trying to correct for it, but it's correcting for the symptom, not the cause. You can't solve it in the software. You have to adjust the manifold geometry." The room was completely still. Renner's expression had moved through several stages in the span of about 5 seconds: irritation, dismissal, something that might have been shock, then a very careful blankness that Marcus recognized immediately as the face of a man who didn't want to show what he was thinking. "That is," Renner said, "a very specific diagnosis." "Yes, you're a maintenance worker. Yes. How do you know anything about injector manifold geometry?" Marcus looked at him. "I read. It was not a complete lie." Another long silence. "The junior engineer, her ID badge," said Jay. Washington Powertrain Engineering was looking back and forth between Renner and Marcus with an expression that was very difficult to read. "Show me," she said. Renner turned to her. "Jordan." "Dr. Renner." Jordan Washington's voice was quiet, but had a backbone in it. "It's 1 a.m. The championship is in 4 days. He walked in here and said the thing nobody else in this room has been able to say in 6 hours. So she looked at Marcus. "Show me." Marcus put on a pair of nitrile gloves from his maintenance cart. He went to the engine. He didn't rush. He moved the way he always moved when he was working methodically, with a stillness that some people read as uncertainty, but was actually the opposite. He examined the manifold assembly, taking his time, his hands finding the specific points he needed to check with a certainty that he couldn't completely disguise, even though he tried. Jordan watched him. She didn't speak. Renner stood with his arms crossed about 8 feet back, his face unreadable. "There," Marcus said after about 4 minutes. He indicated a mounting flange on the secondary injector array, a small, clean piece of machined aluminum that looked, to the naked eye, entirely unremarkable. "This flange. The bore tolerance is off by, I'd estimate, 2 to 3 microns. Doesn't matter at low RPM. At sustained high RPM, the thermal expansion of the adjoining components creates a microgap in the seal. Fuel delivery loses consistency, the timing compensates. Can't compensate fast enough." He straightened up. "You need to remachine the flange to spec, or replace it with a component that matches the original tolerance." Jordan was already leaning in, looking. "We don't have a replacement component," she said slowly. "Not in stock. The manufacturer lead time is." "You don't need a replacement," Marcus said. "You can remachine it on site. Do you have a precision boring tool in the fabrication shop?" "Yes. And a metrology setup? Laser measurement?" "Then it's a 4-hour job, maybe 5. Marcus pulled off his gloves. "I can walk you through it." Jordan looked at him for a long moment. "Can you do it?" she asked. Marcus considered the question. Considered, too, everything that the answer would cost him. Yes, he said. Renner tried to stop it 3 times. The first time he cited the restricted access policy. Only credentialed engineers were permitted to perform work on race hardware. Marcus listened, nodded, and suggested that Jordan could perform the actual machining while he directed. Renner pointed out that Jordan was a junior engineer who had never done precision boring work unsupervised. Jordan pointed out very calmly that she could learn. The second time, Renner said that if the work was performed incorrectly and the engine failed in the race, the liability would be catastrophic. Marcus agreed that this was true and said nothing else. The third time, Renner picked up his phone and said he was going to call the CEO. "It's 1 a.m, Jordan said. She asked to be notified of any developments. Dr. Renner, Jordan's voice was still quiet, still steady. If you call Charlotte Whitmore at 1 a.m. to tell her that a maintenance worker has identified a possible fix, and you sent him home because of a credentialing policy, and we then lose the championship because we couldn't solve the problem ourselves." She let that sit in the air for a moment. "That is a conversation I would personally not want to have." Renner looked at his phone. He looked at Marcus. He put the phone down. "Fine," he said, "do it, but I'm logging every step. And if anything goes wrong—" "If anything goes wrong," Marcus said, "it's my fault. I'll sign whatever you need me to sign." Renner blinked, apparently not having expected that. "Fine," he said again, more quietly. They worked through the night. Marcus directed Jordan through the precision metrology, first measuring the actual bore dimensions against the original specification, confirming his diagnosis with numbers rather than intuition. When the laser measurement returned a deviation of 2.4 microns, Jordan made a small sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "You were right," she said. "The engine was right," Marcus said. "I just listened." The remachining was painstaking. Jordan ran the boring tool while Marcus stood beside her, talking her through each adjustment with the same calm, focused quality that he brought to everything, not rushed, not anxious, just present. Completely and totally present, in that way that some people have, only when they are doing the thing they were made to do. Around 3:30 a.m., Renner sat down in a chair against the wall and fell asleep. Neither Marcus nor Jordan commented on this. At 4:15 a.m., Jordan straightened up from the workbench and stretched her back with a grimace. "I need coffee," she said. "You, please." She came back 5 minutes later with 2 cups from the break room machine. They stood at the workbench in companionable silence for a moment. "How long have you worked here?" Jordan asked. 11 months, Marcus said. And before that, he took a sip of coffee. It was bad coffee. He didn't mind. Machine shop in Columbus. Jordan looked at him. She had the look of someone who was filing something away for later. "Okay," she said, in a tone that suggested she didn't entirely believe him, but wasn't going to push it. They went back to work. At 6:47 a.m., Marcus carefully reassembled the last component, torqued the fasteners to specification, double-checked every connection, and stepped back. "Start it," he said. Jordan looked at him. "You sure?" "Start it." She went to the control panel. The engine turned over a hesitation, a catch, and then it came alive. Not the rattling, labored groan of the night before. A clean, full-throated roar that filled the racing bay and climbed and stabilized and sang. Jordan stood very still for about 4 seconds. Then she pressed both hands flat on the workbench, leaned forward, and closed her eyes. When she opened them, she turned around. She was crying a little, the way engineers cry when something works after a very long time of it, not working, not dramatic. Just 2 quick tears that she wiped away immediately. "Thank you," she said. "I don't even know you're." She looked at his uniform. "Marcus, don't thank me," he said. "You did the machining." "Under your direction, you did the machining," he said again, firmly. She looked at him for a moment, then nodded once. An acknowledgement. In the chair against the wall, Renner startled awake. He blinked. He heard the engine. His face went through several expressions before settling into something Marcus couldn't quite read. He stood up. He walked to the engine bay. He stood there, listening to it run. He did not say a word to Marcus. He did not look at him. He walked to Jordan. Document everything. Every measurement, every adjustment, every step. Then he pulled out his phone and walked out of the bay, and Marcus could hear him talking as he went, calling someone, his voice low and fast. Jordan looked at Marcus. "Don't worry about him," she said quietly. Marcus began cleaning up his tools. He was in his car in the parking lot, about to drive home and change clothes and get Lily ready for school, when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Carter, this is Renner." Please don't leave the facility. The CEO would like to speak with you at 9 a.m. Marcus sat in the parking lot for a moment. He should have felt afraid, or excited, or at least uncertain. He felt, instead, very tired, and very clear, the way you feel at the end of a long night when you have done something difficult and done it right, and now it is simply done. He texted back, "I'll be there." Then he called home. Lily answered on the second ring, because Lily was 13 and constitutionally incapable of letting a phone ring more than twice. "Dad, where are you? I'm up. I'm at work, baby. Ran a little late. Can you get yourself ready? I'll be home by." He did the math. 8 at the latest. What happened? Just had to fix something. What kind of something? An engine. Whose engine? The company's. There was a pause then. "Did you fix it?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "I fixed it." "Okay." He could hear her moving around the apartment, the sounds of morning. "There's cereal on the second shelf. I left you some." "Thank you, Lily." "Dad, yeah, are you okay?" Marcus looked through his windshield at the Titan Apex facility, the clean modern building with the championship banners on the facade, the company's name in 6-foot steel letters above the entrance, the little flag at the top of the flagpole moving in the early morning air. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." He sat in the car for another moment after he hung up. Then he went back inside to wait for 9 a.m. Charlotte Whitmore's office was on the 4th floor of the main building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Indianapolis skyline. It was a deliberate choice. Marcus knew the kind of office designed to make you feel the scale of things, to remind you of exactly where you were and, by implication, where the person behind the desk was relative to you. Charlotte Whitmore was 47 years old, German-educated, and had spent 2 decades in elite motorsport management. She was not a warm woman in the way that certain women in leadership positions feel pressure to be warm. She was direct, controlled, and precise, and she had the ability to make you feel, in her presence, like every word you said was being weighed. When Marcus walked in, she was standing by the windows with a cup of coffee, looking out. She did not turn around immediately. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She turned. She looked at him, not the quick glance of dismissal he'd gotten used to from people in this building, but an actual look. The kind where someone is looking at you rather than around you. She sat down across from him. "I reviewed the security footage," she said. "Okay, you entered a restricted area without authorization. I had a maintenance key. That key is not an authorization to perform engineering work on race hardware." "No," Marcus said, "it isn't." Charlotte studied him. "Walk me through what you did." So he did, clearly, precisely, without embellishment or apology. He told her about the sound, what he'd heard from the service corridor, and what it told him. He told her about the fuel delivery lag, the manifold variance, the thermal expansion at high RPM. He told her about the metrology and the machining, and the 2.4 micron deviation. Charlotte listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Renner tells me," she said, "that you performed a diagnosis that his entire team was unable to arrive at in 6 hours. In approximately 4 minutes, without access to any of the diagnostic data they had been reviewing." "I didn't need the diagnostic data," Marcus said. "I needed to look at the engine." Why? Because the problem was physical, not digital. The data couldn't tell you what you couldn't see. You had to be in the room with it. Charlotte turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. "Where did you learn to do that?" Marcus said nothing. "Marcus." Her voice did not soften exactly, but it changed slightly like a dial being adjusted one small notch. "I'm asking you a direct question. I'd like a direct answer." He looked at her. He thought about the question he'd been asked 1,000 times in 1,000 forms. "Where did you come from? How do you know this? Who taught you?" As if knowledge in his hands had to be explained. As if competence on his resume required a more thorough accounting than it would on someone else's. "I know engines," he said. "I've always known engines." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. Then she set her coffee cup down. "I'm going to need to terminate your employment," she said. Something went very still inside Marcus's chest. Not surprise, exactly. More like recognition. "You entered a restricted area," Charlotte continued, "and performed unauthorized work on proprietary race hardware. That is a clear violation of company policy and of the terms of your employment contract. I cannot allow it to go without consequence." "The engine runs," Marcus said. Very quietly. "I know the team couldn't fix it. I know that too." The championship, Mr. Carter. Charlotte's voice did not rise, but it stopped him. "I am not questioning what you did or whether it worked. I am telling you that the way you did it created a significant liability issue for this company. If you had damaged that engine, we would have faced a lawsuit of a scale that would have— But I didn't damage it, Marcus said. A pause. No, Charlotte said. You didn't. Another pause. Longer. You're still fired, she said. Effective today. HR will process your final paycheck and your severance by end of business. Security will escort you out, she stood. I'm sorry. I genuinely am. Marcus stood. He wanted to say, do you know who I am? He didn't say it. He picked up the jacket he'd set on the chair beside him, nodded once, and walked out of Charlotte Whitmore's office. The security guard was a man named Pete, who had nodded to Marcus every morning for 11 months, on his way through the building. Pete looked genuinely uncomfortable as he walked Marcus to the side entrance, handed him a manila envelope with his personal items from his locker, a photo of Lily, a spare set of reading glasses, a small wrench he'd brought from home, and said, in a low voice, I'm real sorry, man. For what it's worth. Don't be, Marcus said. He meant it. He put the photo of Lily in his jacket pocket. He walked to his car. He sat for a moment in the driver's seat in the side lot, looking at nothing. Then he took out his phone and called Lily's school to make sure she had arrived safely. She had. He put the car in drive. He drove home. Behind him, inside the racing bay on the second floor of Building A, the TRX-9 engine rebuilt on a foundation that Marcus Carter had designed 10 years ago, repaired through the night by his hands, and his knowledge hummed cleanly and perfectly in the early morning light, ready for a championship that nobody yet fully understood who had made possible. And if you're still with me right now, if this story has already gotten under your skin, I want you to do one thing. Drop your city below. Let me see every corner of America this story reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Because what happens next changes everything Marcus Carter thought he knew about what he was willing to fight for. Marcus Carter drove home in silence. No radio, no podcast, no phone calls. Just the sound of the highway and the hum of an engine that wasn't nearly as interesting as the one he'd just left behind. He kept both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, the way his father had taught him when he was 16 years old in a parking lot in Detroit, and he breathed slowly and deliberately through his nose, the way a man breathes when he's trying to keep something inside himself from breaking loose. He was fired. 11 months of arriving before sunrise. 11 months of keeping his head down, doing his job, being invisible. 11 months of mopping floors and replacing filters and hauling equipment through corridors that smelled like industrial cleaner and high-grade motor oil. And it had ended in a 4-minute meeting and a manila envelope with a photograph of his daughter and a pair of reading glasses. He was fired for fixing the thing they couldn't fix. He let that sit in his chest for a moment, turning it over like a stone, examining what was underneath it. He expected anger. He found something more complicated, a feeling that was part exhaustion and part a dark, hollow laugh that he was too tired to actually produce. He had spent 10 years learning how to want less, how to need less, how to shrink the circumference of what he allowed himself to hope for. And somehow, in 8 hours of work in the middle of the night, he had still managed to reach too far. He pulled into the apartment complex at 8:42 in the morning, sat in the parking lot for 2 minutes, and then went upstairs. The apartment was quiet. Lily had already left for school. She had left a bowl of cereal on the counter for him, covered with a paper towel so it wouldn't get stale, with a sticky note on top that said, "Eat this, Dad. I mean it." He stood at the counter and ate the cereal standing up, reading her handwriting, her looping, emphatic cursive that still had traces of the girl she was becoming mixed in with the girl she'd been, and he felt something move through him that was softer and sharper than anything else he'd felt that morning. He rinsed the bowl. He changed his clothes. He sat on the edge of his bed. He did not sleep. He sat there for a while, with his hands loose in his lap, looking at the far wall, and then he reached under the bed and pulled out the old metal storage box he hadn't opened in almost 3 years. The lock combination was Diana's birthday. It always had been. He dialed it without thinking. Inside the box were the engineering sketches. Hundreds of them, layered and ordered in the way Marcus organized everything by problem type, by date, by the stage of development at which he'd abandoned or completed them. Pencil on engineering paper, mostly, though some were on graph paper, and a few early ones were on plain notebook paper that had yellowed slightly at the edges. His handwriting in the margins, small and precise, filling in calculations and notes, and the occasional question to himself, does this hold at temperature variance above 180? And check resonance frequency against manifold B, and, on one page near the bottom, in handwriting that was slightly larger and less controlled than the rest, like it had been written quickly and with feeling. This works. This actually works. He sat on the edge of his bed with a stack of those pages in his hands and just looked at them. The TRX-7 was in there. The original, full, unredacted design, every calculation, every iteration, every version he'd thrown out, and every version he'd kept. His name was on every page. In the corner, the way he'd always done it. M. Carter design, small, unassuming, but there. And on the very first page of the TRX-7 file, there was a date, November 14th, 11 years ago. 2 weeks before the first prototype had run in the Titan Apex testing bay. 3 weeks before Gerald Haynes had taken off his glasses and said, "Son, this changes everything." Marcus looked at the date for a long time. Then he put the pages back in the box, closed the lid, spun the combination lock, and slid it back under the bed. He went to the kitchen, made coffee, and started looking for a new job. He was not a man who sat still for long. Grief had taught him that. Diana's absence had been so enormous in the first months after she was gone that the only way to survive it had been to keep moving, keep doing, keep filling the silence with the one thing that silence couldn't swallow: work. He had rebuilt everything that way: his finances, his routine, his relationship with Lily, his sense of himself as a man and a father. Piece by piece, job by job, day by day, he would rebuild this too. By 9:30, he had sent out 4 applications to machine shops and fabrication facilities within driving distance. By 10, he'd found a listing for a senior equipment technician position at a company that made agricultural machinery not glamorous, but solid work, decent pay, reasonable hours. He wrote a cover letter, attached his abbreviated resume, and sent it. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. Indianapolis area code. He let it ring 3 times, then answered. Marcus Carter, Mr. Carter, a woman's voice. Young, professional, slightly out of breath, like she'd walked fast to make this call. This is Sandra Vu. I'm calling from the HR department at Titan Apex Motors. I'm sorry to bother you, but I was asked to reach out regarding your separation from the company this morning. Okay, Marcus said. The CEO would like to increase your severance package. Given a pause, he could hear papers shuffling. Given the circumstances, she wanted me to communicate that, and to ensure you received it quickly. Marcus thought about Charlotte Whitmore's face in that office. The way she'd said, "I'm sorry, I genuinely am." He thought about what that kind of sorry was worth. "Tell Ms. Whitmore thank you," he said, "but I don't need extra severance. Give me what the contract says." A longer pause this time. "Are you sure? The additional amount would be—" "I'm sure," Marcus said. "Thank you for calling." He hung up. He sat with his coffee for a moment. Then his phone buzzed again, different unknown number. Marcus Carter. Marcus, a voice he recognized immediately, warm, direct, female, with the faint trace of the kind of exhaustion that lives behind your eyes after you've been awake for 20 hours. It's Jordan Washington. He straightened slightly in his chair. "Jordan, I got your number from the facilities directory before they deactivated your access. I hope that's okay. It's okay. I want you to know something," Jordan said, and her voice had shifted into something more careful and deliberate. "What you did last night, I tried to make sure it was documented accurately. Every step, I put your name on everything. I want that on record." "Jordan, let me finish," she exhaled. "Dr. Renner submitted the incident report this morning. I haven't seen the final version, but I heard, and this is just what I heard, that the way he wrote it, your role is described as maintenance staff, who provided supplementary observations during an engineering review." His words. The apartment was very quiet. "That's so," Marcus said. "I filed a supplemental report," Jordan said. "My own account, with specifics. I named you by name and I described exactly what you did and in what order. I don't know if it will change anything, but it exists. And I wanted you to know that someone in that building is telling the truth." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he was looking at the sticky note Lily had left on the cereal bowl, which was still on the counter. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it in a way that didn't have anything to do with strategy or documentation or protecting his interests. He just meant it. "One more thing," Jordan said. "The engine ran clean this morning. All 3 test cycles, perfect timing, full power output, no deviation. It's race ready, a beat. I thought you'd want to know." "Good," Marcus said. "That's good." After he hung up, he sat for a while longer. Then he made a second cup of coffee, took it to the small desk in the corner of the living room, and went back to looking for work. He had a daughter to feed. He didn't have time to be anything other than a man moving forward. He almost made it through the entire day without letting it hit him. It was 6:47 in the evening when Lily came home from school, dropped her backpack on the floor by the door in the way that she always did and that Marcus had given up correcting, and said, without looking up from her phone, "How come you're home so early? You're usually not here till 7. Had a short day, Marcus said. She looked up from her phone. She was 13, and she had inherited her mother's particular gift for reading a room, not just reading it, but reading the person inside it, looking past the surface of things to the thing underneath. She looked at him for about 2 seconds. Dad, what happened? It wasn't a question. Marcus set down the spatula he'd been holding. He was making pasta, something uncomplicated, and turned to face her. I lost the job, he said, today. Lily stared at him. The Titan Apex job? Why? He considered. He could give her the short version, the version where he summarized the situation in 2 sentences and left out all the weight of it. He'd done that a lot over the years. The short version. The version that protected her from things she didn't need to carry. But she was 13, not 8. And she was Diana's daughter as much as his, which meant she could handle more truth than most adults twice her age. I went into a part of the building I wasn't supposed to go into, he said, and I fixed something that needed to be fixed. And they fired you for fixing it. For how I did it. I wasn't supposed to be in that area. Lily put her phone face down on the counter. A serious gesture from a 13-year-old. But you fixed it? Yes. Did it work? Yes. She stared at him. So they fired you. Because you fixed a thing you weren't supposed to touch. More or less. She stopped. He watched her choose her word. That's stupid, it is, Marcus agreed. And it's also the rules. The rules are stupid. Sometimes, he said, yeah. Sometimes they are. He picked the spatula back up. Set the table? She set the table. They ate pasta. She told him about a fight that had happened between 2 girls in her social studies class, delivered with the dry, precise commentary she brought to all social observation. And he listened and made the appropriate sounds and was grateful. He was so deeply grateful for the ordinary, unremarkable forward motion of the evening. After dinner, while Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table, she said, without looking up from her notebook, "Are we going to be okay?" Yes, Marcus said immediately, because that was true, and because there was no version of this conversation where he allowed her to carry the weight of something that was his to carry. She nodded, looked back at her notebook. Then, Dad? Yeah, what did you fix? The thing at the building. An engine. What kind of engine? A racing engine. The one they're running in the championship next week. Lily was quiet for a moment. Her pencil moved across the page. Was it hard to fix? She asked. Marcus thought about the manifold. The thermal expansion. The 2.4 micron deviation that had taken his team 6 hours to not find and him 4 minutes to locate. No, he said, not really. She looked up at him then. Then why couldn't they fix it? He looked back at her. Sometimes, he said, people are so sure of what they know that they stop listening to what's actually in front of them. Lily held his gaze for a moment. Then she went back to her homework. He washed the dishes. He did not sleep well that night. Across town in the Titan Apex facility, Charlotte Whitmore was still at her desk at 11 p.m. This was not unusual. She was known for it, the lights in her 4th-floor office burning, long after everyone else had gone home. The cleaning crew working around her like she was a fixture of the building. What was unusual was what she was doing. She was not reviewing the championship logistics. She was not on a call with the race team in Monaco, or the engineering department in Stuttgart, or the board members in New York who expected weekly updates. She was sitting very still at her desk with a stack of printed documents in front of her. And she was reading. She had started, 3 hours earlier, by pulling the full security log for the previous night. Standard procedure after an incident she wanted to see, exactly when the maintenance worker had entered the bay, when he'd left, what had happened in between. She'd gone through the footage timestamps, cross-referenced with the keycard log, verified Renner's account against Jordan Washington's supplemental report. Jordan's report had stopped her. It was thorough, specific, and written in the plain declarative language of a technical document, but underneath the technical precision was something that read almost like urgency. Jordan had documented not just what Marcus had done, but how he had done it. The speed of his diagnosis, the specificity of his knowledge, the fact that he had identified not just the category of the problem but the exact component, the exact variance, the exact mechanism without reviewing any of the engineering documentation, without accessing any of the diagnostic data, without doing anything except placing his hands on the machine and listening. That was the word Jordan had used. Listening. Charlotte read the report 3 times. Then she pulled Marcus Carter's personnel file. It was thin. 11 months of employment, the 1-page resume, a positive performance review from his facilities supervisor, who described him as reliable, meticulous, and exceptionally skilled for the role, a copy of his employment contract. His emergency contact, Lily Carter, daughter, with a cell phone number. No engineering credentials, no advanced education listed, no previous positions in the industry, nothing that explained what she had seen in the security footage, nothing that explained Jordan's report. She sat back in her chair. She had the feeling she got sometimes, in negotiations when she was certain she was missing a piece of information that everyone else in the room already had. It was an uncomfortable feeling for a woman who prided herself on knowing exactly what she was dealing with. She picked up her phone and called Renner. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Charlotte, the maintenance worker," she said. "Carter. Did you get his full background before the incident?" A pause. "No. He was maintenance staff, HR handles." "Did you interact with him at any point in the 11 months before last night?" "No. Why would I have Paul?" She kept her voice level. "In your 12 years of experience, have you ever seen a facilities maintenance worker walk into an engineering bay and diagnose a precision fuel delivery variance to within 3 microns in under 5 minutes?" A longer pause this time. "No," Renner said finally. "Then don't you think we should have asked more questions before we let him walk out of the building?" Silence. "I'll look into his background," Charlotte said. "Get some sleep." She hung up. She pulled up the company's HR database and searched Marcus Carter. What she found, or rather, what she didn't find, made her sit forward in her chair. The resume he'd submitted listed only the machine shop in Columbus, but the application form asked for a full 10-year employment history, and the box he'd filled in for the decade before Columbus simply said, "Independent consulting and personal matters." 10 years, a decade of his life described in 4 words. Charlotte stared at that for a moment. Then she opened a broader search. Not in the company's internal system, in the engineering and motorsport industry databases that Titan Apex subscribed to. She typed the name Marcus Carter. She added Indianapolis. She added the date range from 12 to 15 years ago. The first result that came back stopped the breath in her chest. She clicked on it. Read it. Clicked on the next one. Read that. Kept going. Each document building on the one before it. Each one adding a new piece to a picture that was assembling itself in her mind, with a slowness that felt like the floor dropping out from underneath her. There were conference papers, industry journal articles, patent applications, 17 patent applications, all in the area of high-performance combustion dynamics and precision fuel delivery systems, all filed in a 5-year window between 11 and 16 years ago, all bearing the same primary inventor, Marcus J. Carter. There were internal Titan Apex documents, old ones, pulled from the archived company records that predated her tenure describing the development of the TRX-7 engine system. In the earliest documents, the lead engineer was listed clearly, M. Carter, principal design engineer. In the later documents, closer to the championship season, the credit structure had been reorganized. The design was attributed to the Titan Apex powertrain engineering team. Carter's name appeared in an appendix, among 14 others, without distinction. And then, in the documents dated 8 and 9 years ago, his name didn't appear at all. Charlotte sat in her office for a very long time. Outside, Indianapolis was quiet. The championship banners on the front of the building moved slightly in the night wind. On the 2nd floor, the TRX-9 engine rebuilt last night, on the bones of a design that the company had taken and filed away and gradually erased the origin of, sat ready in the racing bay, waiting for a race that was 4 days away. Charlotte picked up her phone. She put it down, picked it up again. She did not call Renner. She did not call legal. She did not call the board. She opened her contacts and looked at the name she'd saved 2 hours ago after pulling it from the HR file. Marcus Carter, emergency contact for Lily Carter. She stared at the number. She thought about what she was going to say. She had no idea, yet, what she was going to do. That was a larger question, with larger implications, and she had not become the kind of executive she was by making large decisions at 11 p.m. on an adrenaline spike. But there was one thing she knew with a certainty that bypassed strategy and protocol and the careful management of liability. She had fired the wrong man. Not the wrong man because he'd turned out to be more credentialed than she'd assumed. Not the wrong man because his personnel file was incomplete or his resume had been misleading. She had fired the wrong man because she had looked at a maintenance uniform and seen a maintenance worker, and she had not looked any further. She sat with that. It was not a comfortable thing to sit with, and she was a woman who had forced herself to sit with uncomfortable things for long enough that she knew better than to rush it. She put her phone face down on her desk. She opened the earliest document in the TRX-7 archive, a design brief dated 11 years ago, the first formal internal document in the project file. At the top in the header was a list of contributors. First on the list, marked with a star that indicated primary authorship, was the name she now recognized. She read that document from beginning to end. She read the next one. She read 7 documents in total over the next 2 hours, and when she finally closed her laptop and sat in the dark of her office, she had a complete enough picture to understand what she was dealing with. Titan Apex Motors had built 3 championships on the back of a design that belonged to a man whose name they had quietly erased over the course of several years. And that man had come back not to reclaim credit, not to make demands, not to expose them. He had come back as a maintenance worker. He had cleaned floors and replaced filters, and stayed invisible for 11 months. And the one time he had stepped forward, it had been not for himself but for an engine that was failing. Because he couldn't hear something he'd built dying without doing something about it. And Charlotte had fired him for it. She stood up from her desk, walked to the window, looked out at the Indianapolis skyline, at the building's reflection in the glass, at her own face overlaid transparently on the city lights. "What did we do?" she said aloud, to no one. The city didn't answer her. She went back to her desk. She picked up her phone. She set an alarm for 6 a.m., and then she typed a message to Renner. "Clear my morning schedule. All of it. I need to speak with you and legal at 7 sharp. She sent it. She put on her coat. She walked out of the building and drove home through empty streets, turning over in her mind the shape-up of what she now understood and the distance between that understanding and the thing she was going to have to do with it. She had spent 20 years managing difficult situations, mergers, crises, scandals, failures. She knew how to manage things. She was very good at it. But she had never had to manage the discovery that her company was built on the kind of erasure that she just spent 2 hours documenting. At 6:59 the next morning, Paul Renner walked into the small conference room adjacent to Charlotte's office and found her already seated, with 3 printed documents on the table in front of her, and 2 lawyers from the company's legal team seated across from her, and an expression on her face that made him stop in the doorway. "Sit down, Paul," she said. He sat down. She slid one of the printed documents across the table to him. "I want you to look at that," she said, "and tell me when you've read it." He read it. It was the original TRX-7 design brief. He read it for approximately 45 seconds. His expression didn't change much, but his jaw went slightly tight. He put it down. "I wasn't with the company when this was produced." "I know you weren't," Charlotte said. "That's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking whether, when you reviewed Marcus Carter's work last night, anything felt familiar." A pause. "He knew the engine," Renner said. "He designed the engine, Paul." Charlotte's voice was very even. "The foundational system, the combustion architecture, the injection timing framework, everything the TRX-9 is built on, he built. And at some point, between 11 years ago and now, his name was removed from the record." Renner said nothing. "Who did that?" Charlotte asked. Another pause, longer. "I don't know," Renner said. It was the kind of "I don't know" that acknowledged that someone did know, and that the person who knew was not in this room. "We're going to find out," Charlotte said. "That's what legal is here for." She looked at the 2 lawyers who had been sitting in careful silence. "I want a complete audit of the TRX-7 product documentation from inception through championship certification. I want to know who touched those records, when and why. And I want it done before the championship." One of the lawyers, a woman named Patricia Cho, who Charlotte trusted entirely, nodded. "That's a tight timeline, I know," Charlotte said. "Make it work." She turned back to Renner. "The second thing. Carter's address is in the HR file. I'm going to his home this evening to speak with him personally." Renner blinked. "Charlotte, I fired a man for entering a restricted area," she said. "What I didn't know when I fired him is that the restricted area contained an engine that he designed, rebuilt, and made into the foundation of this company's success. That changes the conversation." She picked up her coffee cup. Significantly, Renner was quiet for a moment. Then, what are you going to offer him? I don't know yet, Charlotte said. First, I'm going to apologize. Then I'm going to listen. She stood up. The meeting apparently was over. Oh, and Paul, she said, at the door. Jordan Washington's supplemental report, the one she filed on the incident. I want it in the official record, unmodified, replacing your version. She looked at him. Is that going to be a problem? Renner looked at the table. No, he said. Good, Charlotte said, and she walked out. Marcus was in the driveway of the apartment complex at 6:12 in the evening, doing what he did when he needed to think and couldn't sit still, which was fixing things. Specifically, he was fixing Mr. Okafor's 2009 Honda Civic, which had been making grinding noise for 3 weeks, and which Mr. Okafor, a retired schoolteacher from the 3rd floor, couldn't afford to take to a shop. Marcus had told him a month ago that he'd take a look when he had time. He now had time. He was underneath the car, on his back on a piece of cardboard, when he heard footsteps. They were heels, on pavement. Moving with the particular precise cadence of someone who was accustomed to always having somewhere important to be, he slid out from under the car. Charlotte Whitmore was standing in the parking lot of his apartment complex in a charcoal gray coat, holding a folder, looking slightly not out of place exactly, but out of context. The way a figure looks when you encounter them, somewhere they don't belong. She looked at him, lying on the cardboard. She looked at the car. She looked back at him. Marcus Carter, she said. He stood up. He was still in the old clothes he'd worn to work on the car, a faded flannel shirt and dark pants, oil on his hands. Nothing like the maintenance uniform she'd last seen him in, but essentially the same. Ms. Whitmore, he said. She seemed to not quite know where to start. He watched her recalibrate. He'd seen it happen in the conference room, too. This micro-adjustment she made when reality didn't match her expectation. She was good at it. It took her about 3 seconds. I went through the archives, she said. Last night. The TRX-7 project files. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket. He said nothing. Your name is on the original design brief, Charlotte said. As primary engineer, yes, Marcus said. It's not on the final championship documentation. No, why didn't you tell me that, in my office, yesterday morning? When I was firing you, why didn't you say who you were? Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Because you didn't ask, he said. You told me I'd violated a policy. You were right. I had. He put the rag back in his pocket. And because I've spent 10 years learning that telling people who I am doesn't change what they see when they look at me. Charlotte's expression did something complicated. She looked away for a moment, at the parking lot, at nothing, and when she looked back, she had the face of someone who has decided to stop managing something and just be inside it. I owe you an apology, she said. Yes, Marcus said. You do, she held his gaze. I'm sorry for firing you. For not asking questions before I did. For she stopped briefly. For what this company took from you. Marcus was quiet. I'd like to offer you your position back, Charlotte said. With no, he said. She stopped. He looked at her. Ms. Whitmore, a position at the company that erased my work and fired me for caring about it is not what I want. Charlotte stood very still. Then what do you want? He wiped his hands again, even though they were already clean. It was something to do while he found the words. I want people like me, he said slowly, to not have to be invisible to survive inside a place like yours. I want the next person who walks into your facility with something real to give, who doesn't look the part, who doesn't have the right connections, who nobody thinks to look at twice. I want them to have a fair chance. He looked at her. That's what I want. Charlotte was quiet for a long time. Behind Marcus, the door of the apartment building opened. He heard light footsteps on the concrete, recognized the rhythm of them before he turned around. Lily stood in the doorway in her school clothes, backpack still on, holding her phone. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Charlotte. She looked at the expensive car parked crookedly in the visitor space. Behind Charlotte looked at it the way a girl who has grown up around engines looks at a car, with a kind of unconscious assessment. Dad, she said. Hey baby, give me a minute. Lily didn't go back inside. She stayed in the doorway, watching, the way Marcus's daughter always watched things quietly, completely, taking in everything. Charlotte glanced at her. Something shifted in her face, not sentimentality, but something more like recognition. Your daughter, she said quietly. Lily, Marcus said. Charlotte looked back at Marcus. She had the folder in her hand still. She hadn't opened it. What you said, she said. About what you want. The people who don't look the part. She paused. What if I could give you that? Not a position. A purpose. The authority to actually build that inside Titan Apex, with real resources, real power, real change. Marcus looked at her. "You want me to fix your culture," he said, "the way I fixed your engine." Charlotte didn't flinch. "Yes," she said, "I do." The evening was getting dark around them. In the doorway, Lily was very still. Marcus turned the offer over the way he turned everything over slowly, from every angle, looking for where it would fail, looking for what it would cost. He thought about the box under his bed, and the sketches inside it, and the date on the first page, and what Diana would have said about this moment. He thought he knew exactly what she would have said. He looked back at Charlotte Whitmore, standing in his parking lot with a folder in her hands and the look of a woman who was not used to asking for things, but was asking now. "My daughter needs dinner," Marcus said. "Come back tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, and bring whoever makes the real decisions at that company." Charlotte looked at him. "All right," she said. She turned and walked back to her car. Marcus watched her go. Then he turned around. Lily was still in the doorway. "Who was that?" she asked. "My old boss," Marcus said. "The one who fired you?" "Yeah." Lily looked at the empty space where the car had been. "What did she want?" Marcus put his arm around his daughter's shoulder and moved her gently back through the door. "Something she lost," he said. "She came back at 8 o'clock exactly." Marcus heard the car pull into the lot from the kitchen, where he was finishing his second cup of coffee. He'd been up since 5. Not because he was anxious, or not only because of that, but because he'd learned long ago that the best decisions got made when you were rested and clear and had already eaten something. And he'd wanted to be all three of those things before Charlotte Whitmore walked through his door. Lily had left for school at 7:15. Before she went, she'd stood in the kitchen doorway in her jacket, with her backpack on, and looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him, like she was checking the structural integrity of something she depended on. "You okay?" she'd asked. "I'm good," Marcus had said. "Is she coming back? The woman from last night?" "At 8. Lily had nodded slowly. "Dad, whatever they offer you." She'd paused, searching for the word. "Don't let them lowball you." Marcus had looked at his 13-year-old daughter for a moment. "Where did you learn that word?" "YouTube," she'd said, and walked out the door. He was still almost smiling about it when the knock came. He opened the door. Charlotte was there, as promised, but she hadn't come alone. Behind her stood two people, a man in his early 60s with the dense, settled posture of someone who had been in boardrooms for 40 years, and a woman Marcus didn't recognize who was carrying a leather portfolio and had the careful, evaluating eyes of someone whose job was to look at situations and determine what they were actually worth. Charlotte had done what he'd asked. She'd brought the people who made the real decisions. "Marcus," Charlotte said. "Come in," he said. He didn't have a conference table. He had a kitchen table with 4 chairs, and the remnants of Lily's breakfast still on the counter. He didn't apologize for any of it. He poured coffee without asking, set the cups down, and sat. Charlotte sat across from him. The man she introduced him as Richard Harlan, the company's chairman of the board, sat to her left. The woman was Elena Moss, their chief legal officer. Nobody made small talk. Harlan looked around the kitchen, with the particular expression of a man who was recalibrating something, the way Charlotte had recalibrated in the parking lot the night before, and then he looked at Marcus with the direct, unadorned attention of someone who was deciding, in real time, how much of his actual self he was going to bring to this conversation. "Charlotte briefed me last night," Harlan said, "and this morning I read the original TRX-7 project files myself. All of them." He set his hands on the table. "I want to say something before we get into what we're here to discuss." He paused. "What happened to your work, the removal of your name, the erasure of your contribution that happened before my chairmanship? I'm not telling you that to absolve this company of responsibility, because the company is responsible regardless of who was sitting in which chair at the time. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I am not here to manage this situation. I'm here because it's wrong, and because wrong things need to be corrected." Marcus looked at him. He'd heard versions of this speech before, the corporate acknowledgement of fault, carefully worded, strategically timed, designed to move quickly past the admission toward the resolution. He'd learned to hear the difference between the performance of accountability and the real thing. Harlan sounded like the real thing. "All right," Marcus said. "I'm listening." Elena Moss opened her portfolio. "We've done a preliminary audit of the TRX-7 documentation over the last 18 hours. It's not complete. A thorough review will take significantly longer, but we have enough to establish the basic timeline." She looked at Marcus directly. Your design credit was systematically reduced across 5 separate document revisions over a period of approximately 14 months, beginning roughly 2 years after your departure from the company. The revisions were authorized by a senior vice president named Gerald Croft, who was head of engineering from 9 years ago until his retirement 4 years ago. Marcus absorbed this, Gerald Croft. He knew the name, had known the man slightly during his time at the company. A political animal, the kind of man who counted credits the way some people counted money. Is Croft still with the company? Marcus asked. Retired, Elena said, but still receiving a consulting stipend. Stop the stipend, Marcus said. A brief pause. Elena made a note. That can be arranged. What else? Marcus said. Charlotte spoke then, and her voice was the most unguarded he'd heard it. We want to restore your name to the TRX-7 project record. Formally, completely, in every document and every public reference. We want to acknowledge publicly that the engine system that built Titan Apex's championship legacy was designed by you. She held his gaze. We also want to discuss compensation. The patents, 17 of them, were filed in the company's name using your work. We believe there is a significant financial obligation that hasn't been. I didn't come here to talk about money, Marcus said. Charlotte stopped. I know, she said carefully, but the obligation exists regardless of whether you want to discuss it. Then have legal handle it, Marcus said. That's what they're for. He looked at Elena, who nodded with the expression of someone making a very large mental note. What I want to talk about is what you said last night, about building something real inside that company. The table was quiet. Harlan leaned forward slightly. Say more about that. And Marcus talked. He talked for 20 minutes without stopping, which was more than he'd talked at one stretch in longer than he could remember. He talked about what he'd seen in 11 months as a maintenance worker, moving through every corner of that facility. The way knowledge flowed in one direction only, downward from credentials to practice, with no mechanism for it to move the other way. The way the hiring pipeline filtered out anyone who didn't arrive, pre-certified, pre-credentialed, pre-approved by the right institutions. The number of gifted technicians and mechanics he'd worked alongside, who understood machines at a depth that most of the engineers upstairs would never reach, but who would never be given the tools or the authority or the room to grow. He talked about his daughter, and about what it meant to be raising a girl who was already curious about engines, already asking questions that her school didn't know how to answer, and who might one day walk up to a place like Titan Apex and be looked through the same way people had looked through her father. He talked about what it cost, not in money, in human capacity, in what gets lost when an industry decides that genius only comes from certain places and looks a certain way. When he stopped, the kitchen was very still. Harlan was looking at him with an expression Marcus couldn't fully read, but that had nothing dismissive in it. What would it look like? Charlotte said quietly. If we gave you the resources to build what you're describing. I'd need full authority, Marcus said, not advisory, not consultative. Structural, the ability to change how the company hires, how it promotes, how it builds pipelines from high schools and community colleges and shop floors. Not a diversity initiative with a budget and a deadline. Something real, something built to last. That's a significant ask, Harlan said. It's a significant problem, Marcus said. Another silence. Then Harlan looked at Charlotte. Something passed between them, the kind of communication that happens between people who have worked together long enough to have shorthand. Charlotte looked back at Marcus. We'd need you to take a formal role. Director level, minimum. The authority you're describing requires a title that the organization will respect. I know, Marcus said. Will you take it? Marcus was quiet for a moment. He thought about Lily's face that morning. Don't let them lowball you. He thought about Diana and what Diana would have done with 20 minutes in a room, with 3 people who had the power to change something real. She would have taken the room. Yes, he said. With conditions. Elena had her pen ready. Marcus set them out one by one. His name fully restored in all records, publicly. The compensation for the patents handled through legal. Without his involvement in the negotiation, he trusted Elena to be fair, and he didn't want to spend his energy there. A formal program charter, board approved, with a 5-year budget commitment. The ability to hire his own team, and one more thing, the one that mattered most to him. Jordan Washington, he said. She filed an honest report when it would have been easier not to. She stays, she gets promoted, and she reports to me. Charlotte almost smiled. That can be arranged. Then we have a deal, Marcus said. He looked at Richard Harlan across his kitchen table. Harlan extended his hand. Marcus shook it. It was a firm handshake, the kind between men who understand that what they're agreeing to is larger than either of them. "One more thing," Charlotte said, as they were standing. "The championship is in 3 days. We'd like you there. Officially. In the Titan Apex suite, not the maintenance corridor." Marcus looked at her. "All right," he said. After they left, he stood in the kitchen for a long time in the quiet. He picked up his coffee cup. It was cold. He drank it anyway. Then he went to his bedroom, reached under the bed, and pulled out the metal box. He dialed Diana's birthday, opened it, took out the first page of the TRX-7 design file, the one with his name in the corner, and the date from 11 years ago, and set it on the kitchen table, where the 3 executives had been sitting 20 minutes before. He looked at it. "Okay," he said quietly, to no one and to someone. "Okay, the championship was in 3 days. The news moved faster than that. Marcus didn't release anything himself. He didn't make calls or send emails or tip anyone to what had happened. But Patricia Cho's audit team had been working through the TRX-7 files for 18 hours, and audits of that kind touch a lot of people. And organizations as large as Titan Apex don't keep secrets perfectly, especially when the secret involves something as combustible as the erasure of a black engineer's foundational contribution to a billion-dollar company's success. By 9 o'clock that night, Jordan Washington sent him a text. "People are talking. Engineering department is buzzing. Renner is apparently in Charlotte's office right now. Thought you should know." By 10, his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize, with a motorsport media company's name attached in the caller ID. He didn't answer. By the next morning, there were 2 more calls from media, and a voicemail from a journalist at a major national outlet, who introduced herself calmly and said she'd received some information about a story involving Titan Apex Motors and would like the opportunity to speak with him before it went to print. Marcus sat at his kitchen table and listened to the voicemail twice. He called Charlotte. She answered on the first ring. "I know," she said before he could speak. "I've been managing it since last night. I want to get ahead of it, Marcus. I'd like to make an announcement from the company before it becomes a story that someone else tells." "What kind of announcement?" "The full truth," Charlotte said. "Your contribution to the TRX-7 system. What happened to the record. What we're doing to correct it, and your new role." A pause. "I want it to come from us, in our words, with your approval on every line." Marcus thought about this. He thought about what it meant to have your story told by the people who took something from you. He thought about the distance between that and telling it yourself. "I want to be in the room when it's written," he said. "You will be, and I want Lily to hear it from me first, before any announcement goes out." "Of course," Charlotte said immediately. That evening, Marcus sat across from his daughter at the kitchen table and told her everything. Not the shortened version, not the version calibrated for what a 13-year-old could handle. The real version from the beginning. The design, the championship. Diana's death and his departure, the 10 years, the maintenance job, the night in the engine bay, and now this. Lily listened without interrupting. She was very still in the way she got when she was absorbing something large, the way she'd been still the night he'd told her that her mother was gone, though she'd been 3 then and hadn't fully understood. And this time she was 13 and understood everything. When he finished, she sat with it for a moment. "They used your engine to win for all those years," she said, "and didn't tell anyone it was yours. Yes, and now they want you back." "Yes," she looked at him. "Are you going to go?" "I already said yes," he said. "But I wanted to make sure you knew why." "Why?" she asked. Not challenging him, actually asking. "Because the job is not about me," he said. "It's about the next person, the one who walks in there and nobody looks at twice. I want to change what happens to that person." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Then Mom would have said yes too." "I know," Marcus said. "She would have had conditions though. I had conditions." Lily almost smiled. "How many enough?" She reached across the table and put her hand briefly over his. One quick, sure pressure, and then she pulled it back and picked up her fork and said, "What's for dinner?" in the tone that meant the important part of the conversation was done, and she'd processed what she needed and was ready to move forward. And Marcus felt the full weight of how much he loved her settle across his shoulders like something warm. "Pasta," he said. "Again, I know what I'm good at." The announcement went out 2 days before the championship, coordinated between Charlotte's communications team and the legal department. Approved line by line in a conference room where Marcus sat at the table for the first time, not as maintenance staff or as a ghost from the archives, but as himself. It was a formal statement, clear and unambiguous, and it said what needed to be said, that the TRX-7 engine system, the foundational technology behind Titan Apex Motors championship victories, had been designed by Marcus J. Carter, principal design engineer, whose contribution had been improperly removed from company records, and who was now being restored to his rightful place in the company's history. It acknowledged the error, it did not minimize it, and it announced Marcus's appointment as Director of Engineering Development and Workforce Innovation, a new department with a board-approved budget and a 5-year charter. Charlotte sent it to him at 7 in the morning. He read it standing in his kitchen. He read it 3 times, then he sent back one word, good. What happened next, Marcus had not anticipated, not the volume of it, not the speed. Within 4 hours of the announcement going public, his name was trending. Within 6 hours, the story had been picked up by every major news outlet that covered motorsport, and several that didn't. By the afternoon, it had jumped from sports media to general news, which was a different kind of attention, broader and less filtered, with a different quality of feeling behind it. His phone became unusable. He turned it off, then turned it back on, because Lily needed to be able to reach him, then created a system where only her number and Charlotte's went through. Messages accumulated, hundreds of them, then thousands, from people he'd never met, from engineers and mechanics and welders and machinists and shop floor workers all across the country who had read the story and found in it something that rhymed with their own experience. People who had been overlooked. People whose names had been borrowed. People who had stood in corridors identical to the one Marcus had stood in, listening to a machine fail, knowing exactly how to fix it, and said nothing because they'd learned the hard way, the only way people like them ever learned it, that stepping forward cost more than staying quiet. He read as many of the messages as he could. He couldn't respond to all of them. He responded to some. One, from a 22-year-old engine technician in Mississippi, said, "I went to your company's website today and applied for the first time in my life to somewhere like that. I never thought they'd look at someone like me. Now I think maybe someone will." Marcus read that one twice. He saved it. He put it in a folder on his phone that he labeled, Simply Why. Jordan Washington called that afternoon. "Have you seen the response?" she asked. "Some of it," Marcus said. "It's enormous. Like the engineering forums alone." He could hear her moving, the sound of her desk chair, the background noise of the facility. "Marcus, people are genuinely." She stopped, and when she came back, her voice was different. More careful. "I want to say something, and I want to say it correctly. Okay? I knew, when you walked into that bay the other night, that you weren't what you said you were. The way you moved around that engine. The things you knew. I knew." A pause. "I didn't say anything to Renner about it. Not because I was protecting you, I didn't even know you. I didn't say anything because I thought, if I make this about who he is instead of what he knows, I'm doing the thing that I hate when people do it to me." She was quiet for a moment. "I just thought you should know that." Marcus was quiet on his end. "Thank you," he said, "for that night, for all of it." "Don't thank me yet," Jordan said. "I've seen the memo about your new role. I'm apparently on your team now. You are. Does that mean you're my boss?" "It does." A brief pause. "Okay," she said, "I can work with that. But I want you to know that I have opinions." "I'd be worried if you didn't," Marcus said. 2 days. The championship was in 2 days, and the facility was a contained hurricane, the kind of organized high-stakes chaos that Marcus had lived inside once before and had spent a decade staying away from. He walked through the front entrance of Titan Apex for the first time, without a maintenance cart, and without a yellow embroidered patch. And the way people looked at him was different now. Some of it was recognition. Some of it was the specific discomfort of people who were recalibrating, who had seen him in one way for 11 months, and were now being asked to see him differently, and hadn't quite resolved the gap between those two images yet. He didn't hold it against them. He understood the gap. He'd been living inside versions of it his whole life. Renner was in the engineering bay when Marcus walked in. The room went slightly quiet. Not dramatically, just the small, perceptible shift in air pressure that happens when the dynamic of a space changes. Renner looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Renner. "Paul," Marcus said. "Marcus." A pause. Renner's face was composed, but beneath the composure was something effortful. The look of a man carrying something he hadn't expected to be carrying. "I read your original design documentation last night." "The full file?" "Okay," Marcus said. "It's." Renner stopped. Started again. "The combustion chamber geometry. The injection timing framework. What you built at 25. Seemed to be having difficulty finding a word that was large enough. It's remarkable, he said finally. It is genuinely remarkable. Marcus looked at him. Thank you, he said simply. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't the closing of an account. But it was something, and Renner received it with a small nod, and they both understood what it was and what it wasn't. Jordan appeared from behind a workbench. The TRX-9's running clean, she said to Marcus. All systems, the fix is holding. She paused. Yours held, by the way. The flange you identified, not a single deviation across 40 test cycles. Good, Marcus said. Good? She looked at him. Marcus, it's perfect. It's textbook perfect. At what point does good become extraordinary? When the car wins the race, Marcus said, and she laughed, and some of the tension in the room exhaled, and Marcus put his hand briefly on the workbench, not on the engine, just on the bench, and stood there for a moment. Inside the place that had been his, and then wasn't, and now was again, though it was different now, and he was different, and that was as it should be. The night before the championship, Charlotte called him at 9. How are you, she asked, not as a CEO asking a new executive. As a person asking another person. I'm all right, Marcus said. He was sitting on the edge of his bed. The metal box was on the floor beside him. He'd had it out again, had been looking through the old sketches the way some people look through old photographs. How are you, honestly? A pause. Still processing, she was quiet for a moment. I've been running companies for 20 years. I've made hard decisions. I've been wrong before I know how to be wrong. But this is, she stopped. This is a different category of wrong, and I'm still sitting with what that means. Marcus thought about what to say. He thought about the distance between accountability and self-punishment, and the difference between the two, and how often people in positions of power confused one for the other. What it means, he said, is that you do the work from here. You correct what can be corrected. You build what I described in your company, and you build it to last. And you don't use the fact that you're doing it as absolution for the thing that made it necessary. He paused. You keep both things true at the same time, a long silence. That's harder than it sounds, Charlotte said. Most things are, Marcus said. Another pause. I'll see you in the morning, Charlotte said. At the track. I'll be there, he said. After he hung up, he sat for a moment longer. Then he reached into the metal box and found the sketch he was looking for, the very first one. The one from before the design had a name, before it had iterations, before it was anything other than an idea that had arrived in his mind at 2 in the morning and that he'd drawn on the back of a gas station receipt because it was the only paper he had. He looked at it, a young man's handwriting, urgent, fast, excited by what it was putting down. He turned it over. On the back was the gas station logo and the date of the receipt, which he had never noticed before. He looked at the date. Lily had been born 4 months after that date. He turned the paper over again, back to the drawing, and sat with that for a long time. His daughter, his engine the same year, 2 things built from the same place in him, the part that couldn't help making things, the part that believed, stubbornly and against all evidence and all cost, that what you built mattered, that it lasted, that it was worth it. He put the sketch back in the box. He set the box on the nightstand instead of under the bed, where it had been for 3 years. Then he turned off the light. He slept better than he had in a long time. Championship morning arrived the way important mornings always arrive: too bright, too loud, too full of consequence. Marcus wore a charcoal suit he'd bought in his earlier life and never had occasion to wear again. And he looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for about 3 seconds before deciding he looked fine and going to make coffee. Lily was already up. She was sitting at the kitchen table in her school clothes. She had school. Championship, notwithstanding, eating cereal and reading something on her phone with the focused expression she brought to things that interested her. You look different, she said, without looking up. I'm wearing a suit. That's not what I mean. She looked up, studied him the way she always did, with that uncomfortable accuracy. You look like yourself, she said. Like actually yourself. Like you did in the pictures from when you were young. Marcus looked at her. Eat your cereal, he said. I am eating my cereal. He drove her to school first. At the door, she turned back and looked at him through the car window. He rolled it down. Dad, she said. Yeah, when? He looked at his daughter standing in front of her school in the morning, with her backpack and her 2 perceptive eyes, and her mother's jaw, and he felt the same thing he'd felt holding her in the delivery room 13 years ago, the same shift, the same sense of what mattered and what the work was for. Go to school, he said. She grinned and went. He drove to the track. The Titan Apex suite was on the upper level of the facility, with a view that looked directly down onto the pit lane and the start-finish straight. It was full of executives and sponsors and racing officials and the particular controlled energy of people who had enormous amounts of money riding on what was about to happen. Marcus walked in and stood at the window. Charlotte appeared at his elbow. She said nothing. She stood beside him and looked out at the track with an expression that was equal parts hope and something harder to name. The cars were on the grid. The TRX-9 engine, his engine, the one he'd built the bones of and rebuilt in the dark of a locked bay 2 nights before he was fired, was in the Titan Apex car at position 2. "Whatever happens," Charlotte said quietly, "what you did both times is already on record. That doesn't change based on today, I know," Marcus said. "I just wanted to say it, I know," he said again. "Thank you." The lights came on. Red, 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 red. Red. The whole room went completely silent. The lights went out. And Marcus Carter stood at the window in a suit he'd bought in a different life and watched the engine that had come from the deepest part of him go screaming down the straight at 200 miles an hour, carrying everything he'd built and lost and found again, carrying it forward into whatever was going to happen next. His hands were perfectly still at his sides. He did not look away. The car took the lead on lap 7. Marcus watched it happen from the window of the suite without moving, without making a sound. Around him, the room erupted, sponsors clapping each other on the back, executives pulling out phones to capture the moment, someone behind him letting out a sound that was halfway between a shout and a laugh. Charlotte put her hand briefly on the window frame beside her, a small involuntary gesture, like she needed something solid to hold on to. Marcus just watched. The Titan Apex car moved through the field with the kind of authority that came from an engine running at its absolute best, not straining, not fighting itself, just delivering power with the clean, efficient certainty of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. He could feel it from up here, even through the glass, even through the noise. He knew that engine's language the way you know the voice of someone you raised. Every note it hit, every frequency, he felt it in his chest before he heard it with his ears. Lap 12, still leading. Jordan texted him from the pit lane. "Telemetry is perfect. 0 deviation. It's singing, Marcus. It is literally singing." He typed back, "I know." He put his phone in his jacket pocket and kept watching. The thing about a race, Marcus had always thought, was that it was the most honest test of engineering there was. You couldn't hide anything. You couldn't revise, refine, resubmit. Whatever you had built was out there on the track, under full load, and the track told the truth about it, with a completeness and finality that no laboratory could match. He had always loved that about it, the unambiguous nature of it. The way the machine either held or it didn't. Lap 19. The leaderboard shifted. A car from the German team had come up fast on the outside, closing the gap through the second sector. The room tensed. Marcus didn't tense. He leaned forward slightly. He watched the Titan Apex driver hold the line through the corner, a decision, a human decision layered on top of mechanical capability, and the German car ran out of room and had to lift. The gap stayed. The gap grew again. Charlotte exhaled beside him. "That's your engine holding that corner," she said quietly. "Not taking credit, just giving it." "That's the driver," Marcus said. "I gave him something to work with. He's doing the work." She looked at him. "You know what I mean, I do," he said. "Thank you." Lap 31. Pit stop. The crew worked the Titan Apex car in under 2.5 seconds, a beautiful piece of choreography, practiced until it lived in muscle memory, the kind of team effort that happened below the level of conscious thought. Marcus watched it with the eye of someone who understood exactly how many hours of repetition were contained in those 2.5 seconds, and felt a respect for it that went beyond words. The car came back out in second. The leader was 15 seconds ahead. Jordan texted again. "Engine temp is perfect. Fuel consumption is better than projected. This thing is running like it was born to do this." Marcus smiled at his phone, just barely, just enough. He put it back in his pocket. He thought about a testing bay in Indianapolis, 11 years ago. A November morning. A prototype engine turning over for the first time, running rough for 30 seconds, and then smoothing out, and Gerald Haynes taking his glasses off and pinching the bridge of his nose and saying, "Son, this changes everything." He thought about all the mornings between that morning and this one. He thought about Diana. And then he stopped, thinking about the past, and watched the race. Lap 44. The leader, a car from a French manufacturer running a different tire strategy, began to fade. The gap came down from 15 seconds to 12 to 9 to 6. The Titan Apex car was not pushing it didn't need to. The engine's fuel efficiency, built into the original design as a core principle rather than an afterthought, meant they could run the final stint at full power while the cars around them managed their fuel loads. It was not luck, it was geometry. It was a decision Marcus had made at 2 in the morning in a design lab 11 years ago. Because he had believed that the smartest way to win a race was to build the kind of engine that didn't have to choose between power and endurance. Lap 47. The gap was 3 seconds. The suite had gone quiet again. The specific coiled quiet of people who want something very badly and have learned enough about wanting things to be afraid of it. Marcus was not afraid. Lap 49, 1 second. Lap 50, same straightaway, same corner. The Titan Apex car went to the inside. The French car had no answer. It didn't have the engine for an answer. It moved aside with the particular grace of a machine that has given everything it has and simply has nothing more to give. The Titan Apex car crossed the line first. The suite detonated. Marcus stood at the window. He pressed one hand flat against the glass. He felt the vibration of the crowd through it, thousands of people on their feet, the accumulated noise of an event that meant something to all of them, for all their different reasons. He felt it in his palm, and in his forearm, and somewhere deeper than that, somewhere in the part of him that had built this thing, and then walked away from it, and then watched it be used without his name on it, for a decade. He stood there for a moment. Then someone he thought it was Harlan, but he wasn't certain put a hand on his shoulder. He turned around. The room was celebrating with the particular intensity of people who needed this win for reasons that went beyond the trophy. Charlotte was on her phone, moving toward the back of the suite. Harlan was shaking hands with 3 sponsors simultaneously. Jordan had texted 14 times in the last 90 seconds, the messages arriving in a cascade that Marcus would read later. He stood in the middle of the celebration and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not vindication exactly, more like completion, like a long sentence that had finally reached its period. He took out his phone and called Lily. She answered on the first ring. "I'm watching it on my phone in the bathroom at school," she said immediately. "Don't tell anyone. Did they win?" "They won," Marcus said. A sound from her end that was pure, uncomplicated joy, a sound she was almost too old to make, and made anyway. "Dad, yeah, that's your engine. That's my engine." A pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Quieter, the 13-year-old version of her mother. She would have liked today. She would have, Marcus said. She would have been completely insufferable about it too. "You know how she was," Lily laughed, a real laugh. "Yeah," she said, "I know." He stood there for a moment with his daughter on the phone in the middle of the celebration, and it was the best moment of the day. What came next was harder. The press conference was scheduled for 1 hour after the race finish. Charlotte had briefed him on it. The night before, it was not just a post-race debrief. It had been restructured, with the communications team working through the night to build something that would address both the championship victory and the public disclosure of Marcus's history with the company. Charlotte had wanted it done this way, not separated, not sequenced to minimize the impact of one or the other, but together. Because they were the same story, Marcus had agreed. He'd had conditions about the press conference too, which Charlotte had met without negotiation. And one of them was that he would not be asked to perform gratitude for being restored to the record that should never have removed him. He walked into the press room with Charlotte and Harlan, and Jordan Washington Jordan specifically, because Marcus had asked for her to be there, and Charlotte had not questioned it, and sat down at the long table, facing 200 journalists, cameras and recording equipment, and he was entirely, completely calm. Charlotte spoke first. She gave a brief statement on the championship. She was precise and warm in the measured way she was always both of those things. Then she pivoted. "Before we take questions on the race," she said, and her voice didn't change in register or pace, but something in it became more deliberate. "I want to make a statement on behalf of Titan Apex Motors that is separate from, and more important than anything connected to today's result." The room shifted. Marcus felt it. 11 years ago, Charlotte said, this company employed a young engineer named Marcus Carter, who designed the foundational engine architecture that Titan Apex has built its championship legacy on. Over the years following his departure from the company, due to decisions made by individuals who are no longer with us, Mr. Carter's design credit was systematically removed from company records. His name was erased. His contribution was absorbed into a collective record that did not acknowledge him. She paused. That was wrong. It was a profound professional and ethical failure, and it happened on this company's watch, and I am standing here today to say so clearly, on record, in front of all of you. The room was completely still. Marcus Carter's name has been fully restored in every company document relating to the TRX-7 engine system and all subsequent derivative architectures. The board of directors has acknowledged the error formally and in writing. And as of this week, Mr. Carter has joined Titan Apex as Director of Engineering Development and Workforce Innovation, a role created specifically because he asked us to build something that would make sure that what happened to him never happens again inside this company. Charlotte looked at Marcus beside her. I'd like him to speak for himself. Every camera in the room turned. Marcus looked at them. He didn't have notes. He'd decided not to bring notes. My name is Marcus Carter, he said. I'm an engineer. I designed an engine that won races. My name was removed from that record, and for a while I let it be removed because I was tired, and because I had a daughter to raise, and because fighting costs something that I wasn't always able to afford. He paused. I'm not here today to ask for sympathy about that. I'm here because there is a version of what happened to me happening right now today, not 11 years ago, today, to people in this industry and in industries like it all across this country. People whose names will never be on what they build. Not because they aren't capable, because nobody looked at them long enough to find out. He let that sit. The engine that won this race today was repaired 2 nights before the championship by a man in a maintenance uniform who had no business being in that engine bay according to company policy. He looked directly into the cameras. That same man designed the core architecture it was repaired back to. I'm telling you that not as a vindication story. I'm telling you that because it should not have required those circumstances for anyone to look at me and see what I actually was. He paused. What I'm going to do in this new role is try to build systems that don't require a crisis to reveal what people are capable of. That's all. He sat back. The room erupted in questions. Marcus answered them for 40 minutes. He was direct, specific, and refused every invitation to center either bitterness or sentimentality. When a journalist asked him whether he was angry, he said, I've had 10 years to do what I wanted to do with anger. Today I'm interested in something more useful. When another asked whether he forgave the company, he said, That's not really the question I'm working on. The question I'm working on is whether we can build something better going forward. When a third asked about the individuals who had removed his name from the records, he said, That's being handled through the appropriate channels. I don't have anything to add to it. He was asked, near the end, what he had been doing in the 11 months he'd spent as a maintenance worker at Titan Apex. Watching, he said, learning what the company looked like from the inside at every level. What worked and what didn't. A pause. It turned out to be the most useful research I could have done for the job I'm doing now. Jordan Washington, sitting 2 seats down from him, made a sound that was very carefully not a laugh. The press conference ended. The cameras followed them out. Marcus managed to separate himself from the main group in the corridor, found a quiet alcove, and leaned against the wall for about 60 seconds with his eyes closed. Just 60 seconds, enough to put something down. When he opened his eyes, Renner was standing in the corridor about 10 feet away. He had clearly not been looking for Marcus. He had been heading somewhere else, and had seen him, and stopped. They looked at each other. Good race, Renner said. Good race, Marcus agreed. A pause. The press conference, Renner said. He stopped. Yeah, Marcus said. You didn't mention my incident report. Or how in the way I characterized your involvement. No, Marcus said, I didn't. Renner was quiet for a moment. Why not? Marcus looked at him. He thought about the honest answer, which was that calling Paul Renner out in a press conference would have been satisfying in a small way and useless in every larger one. That the point was never to score individual points. That you couldn't build something lasting out of the rubble of other people's accountability, you had to build it out of your own. Because that's not what today was for, Marcus said. Renner nodded. His jaw was tight. I'm going to be more careful, he said. It was an odd thing to say, not exactly an apology, but something adjacent to one, something more like a commitment, which Marcus thought was actually more valuable. I know you will, Marcus said. He meant it. The evening found Marcus in the last place anyone expected to find the newly announced Director of Engineering Development at Titan Apex Motors, in the parking lot of the facility, crouched beside Mr. Okafor's 2009 Honda Civic, finishing the brake job he'd started 3 days ago. He'd driven the car over from his apartment after the press conference because he'd told the old man he'd fix it, and he wasn't the kind of person who left things unfinished. He was in the parking lot in his suit pants and a different shirt when Jordan found him at 6:45 in the evening. She stood behind him for a moment before speaking. "You're fixing a Civic," she said. "I said I would. You just got back from a championship press conference. The Civic doesn't know that." She was quiet for a moment. Then she crouched down beside him, looked at what he was doing with the professional interest of an engineer examining a mechanical problem. "The caliper's worn," she said. "I know, I'm replacing it." "Did you have the part?" "Brought it with me." She watched him work. "You know," she said, "most people in your position today would be at a celebration dinner right now." "I'll celebrate with Lily," Marcus said. "She's making dinner." "Which means it's going to be something out of a box, but the intention is good." Jordan laughed. They were quiet for a moment, the companionable quiet of two engineers in the proximity of mechanical work that was going well. "Can I ask you something?" Jordan said. "Yeah. When you walked into that bay the other night, when you were still maintenance, did you know it was going to go the way it went?" Marcus considered. "No," he said. "I knew I could fix the engine. I didn't know what would come after." "Were you afraid?" He tightened a bolt, checked the torque. "Of what would come after?" "Yeah," he said. "A little. I'd been quiet a long time. Being quiet has a gravity to it. It's hard to move against." "What moved you?" He thought about it. "The sound of the engine from the corridor. The particular quality of it, not just a machine failing, but something he'd built failing. Something that had come out of him, in the deepest sense. It was mine," he said simply, "even when my name wasn't on it. It was mine, and I couldn't hear it hurting and do nothing." Jordan sat with that for a moment. "I'm glad you didn't," she said. Marcus finished the caliper. He checked everything twice, the way he always did. Then he stood up and wiped his hands and looked at the car with the satisfaction of a finished thing. "You know what the program needs," he said, "to actually work. Not the headline version, the real version." Jordan stood up beside him. "Tell me. It needs to go into the schools before the kids decide they're not the kind of person who does this. Before they've been told enough times that this world isn't for them that they believe it." He looked at his hands. "It needs to meet people where they are, not where we wish they were. And it needs to be built to last past the people who build it, including me. Because the worst thing we could do is make it depend on any one person being in the right chair." Jordan was quiet. "That's going to take years," she said. "Yes," Marcus said, "it is, and it's going to be hard. The institution will resist parts of it. There will be people who—" "Jordan," he looked at her, "I know. I've been inside institutions my entire career. I know exactly how they resist things." He picked up his tools. "I also know that the engine I designed 30 years from now is going to be built by someone who right now is 14 years old and working on bicycles in a garage and has no idea that a place like Titan Apex would ever be interested in what they know." He paused. "I want that person to have a door." She looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said. "Then let's build the door." He was home by 7:30. Lily had made macaroni and cheese from the box, as predicted, but she'd added things to it in an effort to elevate it that Marcus found genuinely touching. Hot sauce, a little garlic powder, something green that might have been parsley. He sat down and ate it without comment. "How is it?" Lily asked, watching him. "It's great," he said. She narrowed her eyes. "You're not just saying that." "I'm not just saying that." She seemed to accept this. She picked up her fork. "Dad, yeah, I watched your press conference. The school let us watch it in the library." Marcus looked up. "The whole school," he said. "The whole school," she said. "There's this teacher, Mr. Patterson. He teaches shop class. He basically ran in and told everyone, and got the library set up. There were kids crying." She paused. "I didn't cry." "Of course not," Marcus said. "I was very close, though," she said. He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table, in the apartment they'd made their life in, with the macaroni and cheese she'd tried to make something of between them, and he felt the full, unguarded weight of everything that had led to this particular evening. "What was your favorite part?" he asked. She thought about it. "When you said the question you were working on wasn't forgiveness. That the question was whether we could build something better." She looked at him. "That sounded like you." "What do you mean?" "You never waste time on things you can't use," she said. "You always go straight to the thing you can actually do something about." She speared a piece of macaroni. "Mom was like that too, I think, from the stories." "She was," Marcus said, "exactly like that." Lily nodded. Ate her macaroni. "Are you going to be happy there?" she asked. "At Titan Apex, are you actually going to be happy?" He thought about Jordan in the parking lot beside him, about Harlan's handshake across the kitchen table, about the sound of the engine crossing the finish line, about the 22-year-old technician in Mississippi who had gone to the website and applied for the first time. "I think I'm going to be useful," he said, "and for me, that's close to the same thing." Lily looked at him. Then she nodded, with the authority of someone who has thought about something and arrived at a conclusion. "Okay," she said, then okay, he did the dishes. She dried. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. The kitchen was full of something that didn't need words, a warmth that had been there for years, built the same way everything worth having gets built. Slowly, deliberately, one ordinary evening at a time. Later, when Lily was in her room and the apartment was quiet, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and began to write. Not engineering sketches this time, something different. A framework, the shape of what he was going to build, in plain language, from the beginning, who it would reach, how it would reach them, what it would require, and what it would return, and how you measured the thing you were trying to change, when the thing you were trying to change was invisible until it wasn't. He wrote for 2 hours. When he stopped, he had 6 pages. He looked at them. He thought about the first page of the TRX-7 file, the date in the corner, the star that said primary author. He thought about what it had meant to be the person who began something, who put the first mark on the blank page and said, "This is how it starts." He picked up his pen and wrote his name at the top of the first page. Marcus J. Carter, not small, not in the corner, at the top. And then he kept writing. 6 pages became 60. By the end of the first week, Marcus had a full program charter, not a concept document, not a vision statement, not the kind of aspirational language that looks good in a slide deck and dies in an executive meeting. He had a working document with timelines, metrics, budget allocations, partnership targets, and accountability structures built in from the beginning so that the program couldn't be quietly defunded the moment the public attention moved on. He had learned, in his career and in his life, that the most dangerous moment for any new thing was not its beginning, but its middle, the long, unglamorous stretch after the announcement and before the results, when the enthusiasm had cooled and the resistance had organized and the people who'd agreed to support it started finding reasons why this particular quarter wasn't the right time. He was not going to let that happen. Jordan sat across from him in the office he'd been given on the 3rd floor, a real office, not a maintenance closet, not a sub-level storage room, and read through the charter on a Tuesday morning 8 days after the championship, with her coffee going cold beside her because she kept forgetting to drink it. She read for 20 minutes without speaking. When she looked up, her expression was the one Marcus had come to recognize as her equivalent of being impressed, carefully neutral, with something working behind her eyes. "This is aggressive," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. "The high school partnership component alone, you're targeting 40 schools in the first year." 43, Marcus said. "I added 3 last night." Jordan looked at him. "Marcus, 43 high schools. In 1 year. The infrastructure exists," he said. "The vocational programs, the shop classes, the STEM tracks. They exist. Nobody is currently connecting them to a pipeline that leads somewhere real. That's not a resource problem. That's a relationship problem. I can fix a relationship problem." Jordan put the charter down on the desk. "And this section, the internal review board for promotions. You're essentially asking the company to create an oversight structure that didn't exist before, that would the authority to flag promotion decisions that show demographic patterns inconsistent with. I'm asking the company to look at its own data honestly," Marcus said. "If the data is clean, the board has nothing to flag. If the data isn't clean, we need to know that, because pretending otherwise just means the problem compounds for another decade." Jordan was quiet. "Charlotte approved this?" she said. "Charlotte and Harlan both. Legal signed off Friday." He paused. "Paul Renner submitted a written endorsement." She blinked. Renner. She sat back in her chair. She picked up her coffee, realized it was cold, set it back down. "How did you get Renner to?" "I didn't ask him to," Marcus said. "He did it on his own." He paused. "I think he's been carrying something since that night in the Bay. I think it got heavier after the press conference. Some people, when they realize they've been wrong, want to do something about it." Jordan considered this. "And some people manage the optics of the realization and move on." "Yes," Marcus said. "Renner isn't that kind of person. I don't think he ever was. I think he was just conditioned by a long time of working inside systems that rewarded a certain way of seeing. And now he's trying something different." Marcus looked at his desk. That's all anyone can do. Jordan was quiet for a moment. Then, when does this launch? 8 weeks, Marcus said. I want the first cohort of high school partners identified within 30 days. I want the internal mentorship program running in parallel. And I want the first public event, something the industry pays attention to. Not just a press release within 90 days of launch. That's fast. Everything important is fast once you've waited long enough. She looked at him. Smiled, not the professional smile, the real one. The one she used sparingly. Okay, she said. Tell me what you need from me. He told her. She wrote. They worked through the afternoon, the way they always worked, without performance, without politics, with the specific clean efficiency of two people who both cared about the problem more than they cared about anything else, and who had, in a short time, learned to trust each other's judgment in the way that people trust each other when they've been through something real together. By 4 o'clock they had a launch timeline. By 4:30, Marcus had sent it to Charlotte. By 5 o'clock, Charlotte had responded with 3 words. Let's do it. Marcus stared at those 3 words for a moment. Then he put his phone in his pocket, gathered his things, and drove home. The first real test came in week 3. Not the test Marcus had been preparing for, not resistance from middle management, or a budget challenge, or a partnership that fell through. Something he hadn't anticipated, which was, in retrospect, the only kind of challenge worth paying attention to. A journalist published a piece. Not the national outlet that had covered the championship announcement, a smaller publication. Specialized, with a readership inside the motorsport industry. The piece was framed as a counter-narrative, and its argument, made with the particular smooth confidence of someone who has decided on a conclusion before examining the evidence, was this: that the restoration of Marcus Carter's credit was a corporate PR move, timed precisely to coincide with maximum positive attention, that the so-called erasure of his contribution had been, in fact, the normal evolution of a collaborative project's documentation, and that the sudden elevation of Marcus to a senior role at the company that had fired him was, and this was the phrase that stopped Marcus cold, when he read it, a calculated performance of accountability rather than the genuine article. He read the piece on his phone at 7 in the morning, standing in his kitchen. He read it twice. Then he set his phone face down on the counter and made breakfast. By the time he got to the office, his inbox had 47 new messages, some from people who had read the piece and were angry on his behalf, some from journalists who wanted a response, and 2 from executives at other motorsport organizations who had reached out to express, with careful corporate language, their support, which might have been genuine and might have been the industry watching to see which way this went before deciding whose side to be on. Jordan was in his office before he'd taken off his jacket. Have you seen it? She said. Yes, he said. What do you want to do? He hung up his jacket, sat down. Nothing, he said. She stared at him. Marcus Jordan, he looked at her. If I respond, the story becomes my response. The back and forth. The who said what. And everyone who reads that version of the story goes home, thinking about whether Marcus Carter is angry, or whether Marcus Carter was wronged badly enough, or whether this is real or not. He paused. But if we keep building, if the program launches on time, and the first cohort of students shows up, and the data starts to come in, then the story tells itself. You can't argue with a kid who got an opportunity she wouldn't have had otherwise. Jordan stood in the doorway for a moment. That requires patience, she said. I have patience, he said. I've been practicing for 10 years. She looked at him. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. We keep building. She walked out. He opened his laptop and went back to work. Charlotte called him that afternoon. Not about the article directly, she led with a question about the launch timeline, which he answered. And then she said, I saw the piece. I know you did, he said. I was going to release a statement. Don't, he said. A pause. Marcus, Charlotte. A statement from you turns it into a company defending a decision, which is exactly what the piece wants. Let the work answer it. Another pause, longer this time. You're sure, she said. I've never been more sure of anything, he said. She was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. Your call. She hung up. He sat alone in his office. He thought briefly about the piece, about the phrase performance of accountability. He turned it over in his mind, the way he turned problems, over looking for where it was wrong, and where it wasn't entirely wrong, and what the gap between those two things required of him. It required him to be exactly what he'd told Lily he was going to be. Not the story, the work. He picked up his pen and went back to the charter. Week 5, the first school partnership signed. It was Jefferson Technical High School in Indianapolis, a school with a shop program that had been running for 30 years on shrinking funding and an increasingly outdated equipment inventory, with a teacher named Mr. Anthony Delgado, who had been there for 22 of those 30 years, and who had, in that time, sent approximately 0 of his students into professional motorsport engineering because the bridge between his classroom and that world had simply never existed. Marcus drove to the school himself, not with a communications team or a photographer. By himself in his car, with the program charter in a folder on the passenger seat. He met Delgado in the shop room during a free period. Delgado was a compact man in his mid-50s, with the permanently slightly stained hands of someone who had been working with metal and grease for decades. And he looked at Marcus with the specific, careful assessment of a man who had been promised things before and had learned to verify before he believed. "I've read your statement," Delgado said. "The announcement. The program outline. What do you think?" Marcus asked. "I think it sounds good," Delgado said. "Most things that eventually disappoint me sound good at the beginning." Marcus nodded. "Fair," he said. "What would make you believe it?" "I'd believe it if, 2 years from now, one of my students is actually working somewhere in that industry," Delgado said. "Not interning, not touring the facility, working. With a paycheck and a future. That's the goal," Marcus said. "That's always the goal," Delgado said. "It's the delivery that tends to fall apart." Marcus looked at him. He thought about the 22-year-old technician in Mississippi, about every message in the folder he'd labeled Y, about Lily at the kitchen table and the cereal she'd covered with a paper towel. "Mr. Delgado," he said, "I spent 11 months cleaning floors in the building where I used to be the chief design engineer. I did that because my daughter needed me stable more than she needed me famous. I know what it looks like when the system doesn't work. I'm not here to manage the optics of fixing it. I'm here to actually fix it." Delgado looked at him for a long moment. Really looked at him, the way the man had probably looked at thousands of students over 22 years, trying to see what was actually there rather than what was being presented. "All right," he said. "Show me the contract." Marcus opened the folder. They signed it that afternoon. He called Jordan on the drive back. "Jefferson Tech is in," he said. She made a sound like someone who has been holding their breath. "That's our first one." "That's our first one," Marcus agreed. "How'd it go?" "What was Delgado like?" "Skeptical," Marcus said. "Exactly the right amount." She laughed. "Good. I trust the skeptical ones. They're the ones who will hold us accountable when we need it." "That's why I went there first," Marcus said. By week 8, they had 11 school partnerships signed. By the time the launch event happened, a public symposium at the Titan Apex facility, open to the press and the industry, structured around a panel of engineers from different career paths, different backgrounds, different entry points into the field. They had 17. Marcus moderated the panel. He sat on a stage in front of 300 people, with 4 engineers beside him, whose stories covered a range that the industry almost never showed publicly. A woman who had started as a parts cleaner at a small team and taught herself computer-aided design on a borrowed laptop at night. A man who had come from a family of auto mechanics in rural Georgia and had rebuilt his first engine at 12. A recent graduate of a historically black university who had nearly abandoned engineering entirely after her first year in the industry because she'd been made to feel, consistently and in small ways that were harder to point at than a single incident, that she was in the wrong room. She was 26. She had been at Titan Apex for 4 months, hired through the first round of the new program. Her name was Amara. Marcus introduced her last, and when she started talking, the room changed. Not dramatically, not with applause or visible emotion. Just that quality of air that shifts when something true is being said by someone who has earned the right to say it, and the people listening know it. She talked about the small room feeling, the invisible tax of being underestimated, which wasn't one big wound but 1,000 small ones, each too minor to call out, each entirely sufficient to add to the weight. She talked about the specific experience of knowing something and watching someone else be asked about it, about bringing a solution and having it attributed to the room rather than to her. And then she talked about what had changed. "I was hired into a program that told me, before I walked through the door, that my background was a qualification rather than a liability," she said. "That the way I learned in shop class, in my grandmother's garage, from YouTube tutorials at midnight was considered relevant, not embarrassing." She paused. I had never worked anywhere before where someone looked at how I learned and said, "That's interesting. Tell me more," instead of telling me what I should have done instead. The room was very quiet. That changed what I was willing to try, Amara said. When you spend enough time being told you're in the wrong room, you start believing it. And then you start making yourself smaller, because smaller things don't get questioned as often. She looked at Marcus briefly. Someone built me a door and told me it was mine to walk through. That's it. That's the whole thing. It doesn't sound like much. It is everything. Marcus looked at the room from the stage. He saw journalists writing. He saw engineers who had been in the industry for decades with expressions he couldn't fully categorize, something between recognition and discomfort. And something that might, in some of them, have been the beginning of a question they hadn't asked themselves before. He saw Richard Harlan in the back row, sitting very still. He saw Charlotte, standing to the side, not on stage, just watching. After the panel, after the journalist had asked their questions and the attendees had filed out toward the reception, Marcus found a quiet spot in the corridor. He needed 1 minute alone, just one. He thought about Gerald Haynes, who had called him personally, out of nowhere, because he'd read a paper and recognized something in it. Who had said, "Son, you are going to be famous." Who had been wrong about the famous part, but right about everything underneath it. He thought about Diana, who had walked up to him at a conference and said, "I've been thinking about what you wrote for 3 weeks." Who had seen him so completely and so immediately that it had felt like being known before you'd finished introducing yourself. He thought about Lily, who had told him not to let them lowball him, and who had watched the press conference in a school library, and almost cried, and was very proud of herself for not quite doing it. He stood in the corridor for 60 seconds. Then he walked back into the room. The twist that changed everything came 11 weeks into the program, and it came from the last direction Marcus had expected. He was in his office on a Thursday morning when his assistant, a young man named Dev, who had been brought on specifically to support the program, knocked on his open door and said, "There's a call for you." The caller says his name is Thomas Croft. Marcus looked up. "Croft, he says he's the son of Gerald Croft, the former SVP. The room was very quiet for a moment. "Put him through," Marcus said. He picked up the phone, "Mr. Carter." The voice on the other end was young, late 30s, maybe 40. Controlled, but with something underneath the control that sounded like effort. "My name is Thomas Croft. My father is Gerald Croft." "I don't know if you remember him. I remember him," Marcus said. "I want you to know that I've read everything, the audit report, the documentation, the press conference." A pause. "I want to say something, and I want to say it clearly. What my father did was wrong, I know that. I've known something was wrong for years. I used to hear him talk about the TRX project, and the way he talked about it never quite added up to me, though I couldn't have told you why at the time." Another pause. "I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm not calling to manage something on his behalf. He's 81. He's not well. He doesn't know I'm making this call." The voice steadied. "I'm calling because I want you to know that at least one person in that family understands what he took from you, and is ashamed of it." Marcus sat with the phone against his ear. He had not expected this call. He had not thought about Gerald Croft's family, had not considered that somewhere in Indianapolis or wherever they lived there was a son who had been carrying something about this, in the way that children sometimes carry the weight of what their parents did without having any power over the shape of it. "Thomas," Marcus said, "yes, I appreciate the call." He meant it exactly as much as it sounded. "What your father did affected my life in ways that were real and lasting. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but I'm not carrying it as something that defines me anymore. The work I'm doing now, that's what I'm carrying." A pause. "If you want to do something with what you're feeling, I can tell you where to put it." A pause on the other end. "Tell me," Thomas said. "We're building a program," Marcus said. "The details are on the company website. We need industry mentors. People who are willing to work with young engineers from backgrounds the industry doesn't usually look at. If your professional experience is relevant." "I'm a mechanical engineer," Thomas said. "Aerospace, 20 years. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment. "Then you're relevant," he said. "Send your resume to the program coordinator. Her name is Jordan Washington. Tell her I said to expect it." A long pause. "All right," Thomas said quietly, "I will." He hung up. Marcus sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he called Jordan. "I need you to expect a resume from a Thomas Croft," he said. "Mechanical engineer, aerospace, 20 years experience." "He wants to mentor Croft," Jordan said, as in, Gerald Croft's son, Marcus said. Yes, dead silence on her end. Marcus, I know, he said. Put him in the pool. Evaluate him on his qualifications. If he's good, use him. If he's not, don't. He paused. The program doesn't get to be about who people's fathers were. That's the whole point. Another silence. Okay, Jordan said in the voice she used when she was both impressed and slightly exasperated. Okay, thank you, Marcus said. He put the phone down. He sat in his office for a moment. He thought about what it took to call someone you had reason to believe your family had harmed, with no agenda except to say so. He thought about what it cost. He thought it probably cost a great deal. He filed it in the same place. He filed everything that mattered and couldn't be acted on immediately, in the part of him that kept the count of what human beings were capable of when they chose to be more than the worst thing near them. It was a long count, longer than he'd expected when he was young and angrier and less patient. It had grown longer the more he paid attention. Lily turned 14 3 months after the championship. She asked for one thing: to spend the day at Titan Apex. Not the public-facing parts, not the suite where sponsors stood at windows and watched cars win races. She wanted to see the engineering bay, the fabrication shop, the testing lab where the data came in during a race, and the engineers read it like a language. Marcus took her on a Saturday when the facility was quiet. He showed her everything. He showed her the metrology lab, where the laser measurement equipment could detect a variance of 2 microns, and she stood in front of it with her arms crossed and said, "That's what you fixed." That's what the 2.4 microns was. That's the machine that measured it, Marcus said. Can I touch it? No. She looked at him. Why not? Because it costs $400,000, and you have to be certified to operate it. How do I get certified? He looked at his daughter. Finish high school, he said. Then we'll talk. She nodded seriously, as if this were a contractual arrangement she was prepared to honor. He showed her the fabrication shop, where a technician named Willis, a man in his 40s who had been at the company for 15 years and who was one of the best precision machinists Marcus had ever encountered, was running a component through a CNC mill with the focused calm of someone doing something they were built for. Willis stopped when he saw Marcus nodded, then saw Lily looking at the machine with undisguised fascination. You want to see how it works? Willis asked her. She looked at Marcus. He nodded. Willis spent 20 minutes showing her the setup, the toolpaths, the material specifications. Lily asked 6 questions, each one more specific than the last. Willis answered all of them, with the particular satisfaction of someone who is rarely asked good questions, people who will actually understand the answers. When they left the shop, Marcus glanced at his daughter. She was very quiet. What are you thinking? He asked. That I've been taking the wrong classes, she said. He stopped walking. What? I've been taking the classes that look good on college applications, she said. But that, she gestured back toward the shop. That's what I actually want to understand. The material behavior, the tolerances, the way you have to think about the physical reality of the thing, not just the equations. She looked at him. Can I take shop class next year? Marcus looked at his 14-year-old daughter. He thought about a man named Anthony Delgado who had been teaching shop class for 22 years at school down the road, who had signed a partnership agreement with a program that Marcus had built, who had 22 years of students who had gone on to do things the industry never saw coming. Yes, Marcus said, you can take shop class. She nodded. Satisfied, they walked to the engineering bay. He showed her the TRX-9, the current engine, the one that had won the championship, the one she had watched cross the finish line on her phone in a school bathroom. It sat on its stand in the quiet of the Saturday bay, with the particular inanimate authority of a powerful machine at rest. Lily stood in front of it for a long time. This is the one you fixed, she said. That's the one, Marcus said. She reached out her hand and then stopped, looked at him. Go ahead, he said. She placed her palm flat on the engine block. Held it there for a moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Marcus watched his daughter's face while she stood with her hand on the machine, the engine that had come from him, that had been taken and returned and rebuilt, and that had carried everything he'd built across a finish line, and he saw in her expression something that he recognized, because he had felt it himself 30 years ago, the first time he had placed his hands on something mechanical and felt the possibility of understanding it. She was going to be an engineer. He had known it for a while. This confirmed it. He stood beside her and said nothing, because some moments don't need words, and this was one of them. 1 year after the championship, Marcus stood at the front of a room at Titan Apex Motors to address the first cohort of the Carter Engineering Access Program, 22 young people, aged 18 to 24, from 17 different high schools across 4 states, with backgrounds that collectively contained more mechanical instinct and raw problem-solving capacity than any room Marcus had stood in since the early days of his career. He had named the program himself, reluctantly, because Charlotte had insisted and Jordan had backed her up. And he had eventually decided that if your name was going on something, it was better to make sure the thing was worth it. He looked at the room, 22 faces looking back at him. Nervous, some of them, trying not to show it. The particular combination of hope and self-protection that people carry when they've been told enough times that places like this aren't for them, and have decided, against all prior evidence, to try anyway. He stood at the front of the room. He did not have notes. "I'm not going to tell you that you belong here," he said. "You know whether you belong here. You've known for a long time. What I'm going to tell you is that this room is going to be harder than you expect and more worth it than you can currently imagine, and that the two things are not unrelated." He paused. "You were selected because you can see things, not because you can recite things, not because you tested well, not because you came from the right place or knew the right people, because you can look at a problem and see into it in a way that not everyone can." He looked at them. "That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the only thing that matters in this building. Everything else can be taught." A young woman in the front row, the one Marcus had noticed immediately, the one who had been looking at the engine diagrams on the wall with the kind of attention that meant she was already asking questions about them, raised her hand. "Mr. Carter," she said. "Marcus," he said. She blinked. "Marcus," she paused. "How do you know that we can see things? How do you actually know?" He looked at her. "Because of where you came from," he said. "Not where you didn't come from. Where you did," he paused. "You didn't get here by being handed things. You got here by figuring out how to get things nobody was going to hand you. That's the skill. That's the exact skill this industry needs and consistently fails to recognize." He looked at the room. "I got here the same way. It just took longer." The young woman nodded slowly. He saw in her face the thing he'd been building toward. Not gratitude, not relief. Something more durable than either. Recognition, he concluded in the only way that felt true. Without flourish, without performance, in the plain language he had always used when something mattered enough to be said simply. "You're going to do things in this building that nobody thought to put your name on yet," he said. "Put your name on them, from the beginning. Put your name on your work, on your ideas, on every solution you arrive at. Don't make it easy for anyone to forget." He paused. "And when you get to a position where someone else's name should be remembered, remember it." The room was quiet. Then someone started to clap. It spread, not the polished, contained applause of a corporate event, but the real kind, the kind that has feeling in it, that starts somewhere genuine and moves outward. Marcus let it happen. He thought about Gerald Haynes saying, "Son, you are going to be famous." He thought about Diana and the birthday cake that was going to be purple because purple was the only color that mattered. He thought about a grease-stained uniform and a mop bucket and a dying engine in a locked room at 1 a.m, and the 45 seconds he had spent at the service door deciding whether to go through it. He thought about Lily, who would take shop class in the fall and would, at some point in the future that he could already almost see the shape of, place her hands on an engine the way she had placed them on the TRX-9 last Saturday, and understand it. He stood at the front of the room and received the applause for exactly as long as it lasted, and then he said, "All right, let's get to work," and they did. The man they had underestimated was never just fixing their engines. He was building the people who would build the next ones, and now, finally, everyone knew it.